After his death, Aoi Hiroto is reincarnated as a beast-like race, similar to Ghislaine's race, but with the memories of his past life intact. Now, torn between his animal instincts and human rationality, he tries to find his place in this new world. While Rudeus continues his journey, the protagonist forms new connections and learns more about this new world. Between internal and external challenges, he seeks to understand the reason for his reincarnation, facing both his wild nature and the mysteries that link his past to his future. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni Sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Mushoku Tensei as a Beast Monarch? Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please super smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of a beast monarch without further ado. Aoi Hiroto lived an ordinary life but was intensely focused. At 20, he was on the verge of a typical life but with a promising future ahead. He was studying game design technology at university and working as an intern at a small game development company, where he spent his days immersed in code, testing his ideas, and trying to shape virtual worlds and stories he himself had always enjoyed playing. Although it was just an internship, he had big ambitions, and technology had always fascinated him. But for now, this was his reality. He quickly put on the company shirt and black pants, grabbed his backpack, and left home. On the way to the train station, Aoi passed the same street, saw the same shops, the same hurried faces heading to work. He didn't feel particularly different from any of them. He was just another person in the crowd, trying to find some meaning amidst the daily chaos. When he arrived at the station, he saw Yuka, a coworker who usually took the same train. They exchanged a quick nod and a tired smile as they got on the train. "Aoi, you've been too dedicated to that game. Have you thought about taking a vacation?" she said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. "I think my vacation will be when I finally finish this damn project," he replied with a sigh. Looking a bit concerned, she warned, "You're going to end up collapsing from exhaustion. I know it's your first independent project, but you need to take it easy." "Haha, but it'll be worth it soon." Aoi and Yuka continued talking as the train moved on. She joked about his serious demeanor, nudging his arm and saying he needed to relax a bit, and the game should be more about fun than obligation. He smiled slightly but looked away, a little embarrassed. As much as he admired Yuka, he knew he had no room for anything besides work and training in his schedule. However, when he saw her laughing, he caught himself thinking that maybe going out with her might not be a bad idea, a thought he quickly brushed aside, refocusing on what he needed to do at the office. When they arrived at the office, the routine continued without surprises. Aoi greeted his boss, took the file with the day's tasks, and sat down at his desk. The office was simple, with white walls and a constant smell of coffee. His boss, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor, handed him yet another challenge for the day. "Aoi, I need you to adjust the combat AI. Let's make the enemies adapt better to the player's style." "Got it. I'll start working on it right away." The day went by with few interruptions, except when Yuka came over to discuss the development progress. She was more experienced and always brought new ideas, but Aoi was too focused on his project to pay attention to anything beyond his monitor. When the workday finally ended, Aoi felt a momentary relief. He turned off the computer and packed his things. Yuka was still chatting with some colleagues about new projects and inviting everyone for a drink after work, but Aoi had somewhere else to be tonight. He put on his headphones, picked up his backpack, and waved goodbye. When he got home, no one was there yet. His mother was still at work. She had been working alone for some time to allow him to focus on his studies, which had made their situation quite difficult since his father's death. Despite this, she always worked hard to give him the best opportunities, and with some help from his aunt, he managed to get into university. You could say he would never have come this far without those two. They were the most important people in his life. He quickly prepared something simple for dinner: rice, fish, and vegetables. While he ate, he put on the latest episode of the anime he was following. Maybe I'll accept the next invite they give me to go out with the people from work. After all, he was relatively stable at the moment. It might be time to look for a girlfriend. Yuko was single, if he remembered correctly, and she was really nice. He'd had a girlfriend a few years ago, but she ended up going abroad to study, and they decided not to maintain a long-distance relationship, even though they still liked each other. After dinner, he changed clothes and went out to his grappling training, looking for something to clear his mind from the routine. The training was intense, as always. On the mat, he could forget about work, codes, and responsibilities. There, the only thing that mattered was technique, movement, and physical contact. He had started training at a young age, since it was close to his home, and he only wanted to practice a martial art because it seemed cool to watch in anime, manga, and novels. It eventually became a serious hobby, practically inseparable from his life. "You look fired up today, Hiroto," Kazuki said as he got up from a breathtaking fall. "Is that the best excuse you can come up with for falling so fast?" he thought. I smiled and said, "It's more accurate to say that you're the one getting worse." He scratched his head, embarrassed. "Heh, I just found out my girlfriend is pregnant. Maybe I'm a bit distracted." I was surprised. Now, that's a surprise. "Congratulations, by the way. Weren't you two going to wait until you got married?" He laughed. "Not everything went as planned, so we want you to be the godfather. Are you in?" he offered as we headed to the locker room. "Someone's got to set a good example for the kid, after all," I said, laughing as I dodged the punch that followed. As we changed, we continued the conversation, talking about how we would make sure the kid would be a pro fighter if he showed an interest in the sport. In the parking lot, I headed toward my bike and got ready to leave when I heard Kazuki again. Still with that nervous smile, he said, "Thanks, man. Seriously, it means a lot." I nodded with a sincere smile, and we both went our separate ways, each heading home. The night was cold, and the damp air cut Aoi's face as he pedaled quickly home after training. The traffic was at a standstill, but the city still vibrated with nightlife. His legs were tired, his body still feeling the strain from training, but he felt relieved. Today's training had been intense, and for at least a few hours, he hadn't thought about codes or the project consuming him. He was filled with a moment of serenity. Suddenly, the peace he felt was shattered. Aoi looked ahead and saw, further down the street, a truck speeding towards a group of teenagers apparently arguing on the sidewalk. The driver slumped over the wheel, seemingly asleep. In their argument, none of the three noticed the danger coming their way. With quick thinking, he pedaled towards the accident, intending to throw his body over the kids by throwing himself from his bike while shouting, "Watch out, get out of the way." His heart pounded in his chest. He saw the three teens now realizing their situation, as well as a homeless man trying to push them out of the way, and he threw himself with all the strength he could muster. But to his despair, his leg, tired from training and the sudden effort, stiffened as a cramp hit him at the worst possible moment, and he didn't manage to throw himself with enough force to get them out of the way. In fact, the only thing he managed to do was increase the number of victims. He managed to reach one of them, grabbing them by the shoulders and trying to pull them out of the way, but the force of the collision was brutal. He didn't see if he managed to save anyone, and the truck, with a violence that made Aoi's body twist on impact, finally hit them all. During the impact, as his body gave in to the pain and everything around him blurred, a feeling of injustice pierced him like a blade. He still had so much to do, so many dreams to accomplish, so many debts to repay. He thought of the unfinished project, the diploma he still didn't have, and his mother and aunt who were waiting for him at home. Not now, not yet, he thought, fighting against the darkness enveloping him. The world was crumbling around him, and all he wanted was one last chance to truly live. The metallic sound of deforming metal and the crushing pain consumed his perception. He saw everything in slow motion. The ground approached with terrifying speed. His vision darkened. Then, everything went silent. Aoi slowly opened his eyes, feeling a lightness he had never experienced before. The pain, which seemed to have consumed his body, had vanished. He was lying on the asphalt, with his senses so numb that his body no longer felt like his own. The sensation of being somewhere else was unmistakable. A constant buzzing trembled in his mind, and reality seemed strange and distorted, as if he were dreaming. It was then that he felt an immense warmth, seeing a lot of blood spreading around him. His body seemed to be on fire, while at the same time, a cold sensation took over his consciousness. The vision of people crowding around him and the sound of honking deeply resonated in his mind as he sank into darkness. He tried to get up, but his legs felt heavy, as if time itself was against him. He tried to call for his mother, but no sound came out. The light around him began to distort further until everything turned into a thick fog, and he found himself at a crossroads. Something was off. Something had changed. Aoi then regained consciousness, but no longer as the 20-year-old chasing his dreams. Now he was facing something much deeper. He saw his own reflection in a shattered mirror, fragmented. It was as if he was watching his life unravel, the moments he had let slip by, the choices he hadn't made. Time seemed to have sped up. Back in the intense light, Aoi felt his mind finally quieting down. He didn't know if he was dead, just dreaming, or merely delirious. But what he knew with absolute clarity now, more than ever, was that he couldn't go on like this. I still had so much to do, he whispered to himself as the light around him began to dissolve. Before he could fully understand what this realization meant, everything faded to black. I woke up with a strange feeling, as if my body wasn't the same, as if I wasn't the same person. Something was wrong? No, that wasn't quite it. It was more like everything around me was different, more expansive and more wild. For a second, I wondered, what is happening? Where am I? I tried to open my eyes, but everything was blurry. My eyes? They felt heavy, though not uncomfortably so. Blue spots moved everywhere, making it hard to focus. It was as if I could see the world in a different way, more sharply. With my vision still blurred, I tried to focus on anything around me. I noticed something different about myself. My hands, they weren't the same. They were smaller, with shorter fingers, small claws emerging from them, and dark skin. Looking around, or at least at what I could see, I began to move my tiny hands around and then noticed something else. My ears. Were they large? And furry? They had a strange shape, like a cat's or a dog's. Is this me? Are these my ears? Like an animal's. My memories. Everything felt distant. It wasn't like I had forgotten who I was, but more like a weight had settled on my chest, something that made me feel disconnected. What I knew for sure was that this was not Kyoto. As I continued to feel around, I discovered a soft skin, what felt like fur, fluffy and smooth. It seemed like a person, but very large, or maybe I was just very small. I heard something close to me again, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Blah blah, blah 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 blah, another voice, a bit further away, spoke this time. I started trying to discern the sounds around me, only to realize they weren't Japanese. From what I could tell, they weren't English or Spanish either. Nothing anyone was saying made sense to me. Everything felt strange. The way people moved, the nature surrounding me, the sounds. None of it was familiar. And then, the faces started to become clear. A large, serious face bent over me with a stern expression, but when it saw me, healthy and unharmed, his look softened slightly. He was smiling. A small but genuine smile that soon faded. He looked strong, with dark skin, dog-like ears, and silver hair. He seemed impassive, yet I noticed a tail wagging animatedly. What is this? Are we all cosplaying here? I tried to ask him where I was, MHM, or at least that was my idea, but only random whimpers came out of my mouth. There was another woman in the room, almost scantily dressed, with rabbit-like ears and blonde hair. She examined me from various angles before nodding and leaving the tent. My memories were blurry, distant. It wasn't that I had forgotten who I was, but everything seemed veiled, as if a weight was pushing down on me, distancing me from who I once was. One detail, however, was clear: I had died. This was not my previous life. That thought was a mix of relief and confusion. Could it be, after dying, I reincarnated? Blah blah blah, the man said something before leaving the tent. I thought this was fiction. Was this really happening? I was so lost that I didn't even notice when something, or someone, picked me up. A warm, safe feeling, and the gentle scent of skin and leaves comforted me. This someone had a serene, loving presence, and though I didn't know her, a primal instinct whispered in my mind. My mother. I couldn't understand a word that people around me were saying. Everything sounded strange, even the words spoken by the gentle face looking at me. The woman had an expression of tenderness, and even without understanding her language, I could feel her intentions. She seemed joyful, caring. She had short white hair and red eyes, with dog-like ears that I guessed were just like mine. I didn't know what she was saying, but the calm tone and genuine smile were something my heart understood. Still stunned by all these new experiences, a wave of tiredness suddenly washed over me, and I passed out. In the early days, this new reality was harsh and bewildering. I could feel my muscles growing stronger than I expected. My hands, still small, were already stronger than those of other children, and though my movements were clumsy, they were agile. As the days went by, Celine, as my mother seemed to be called, took me to explore what I somehow understood to be our home. She carried me through branches, enormous trees, climbing through the heights of the forest. My mother carried me with a gentle smile, as if she wanted to show me every bit of this new world. As we climbed each step of trunks and vines, a thought echoed in my mind. This certainly doesn't seem safe to do with a baby. And at the same time, I was fascinated by the natural way she moved. She showed no fear, was perfectly in control, leaping from branch to branch, and I, with no other option, could only watch with a mix of trepidation and admiration. The forest was indescribable. Massive trees whose thick leaves filtered the sunlight into fine, bright rays, casting a soft green glow in the air. The constant humidity and the fresh, damp smell of leaves filled the air. Looking at it all, I thought, is this my new home? How can something like this even exist? By now, I was almost certain that I wasn't on Earth anymore. I doubted trees could grow this huge there. None of these people seemed to be at some cosplay event, and this superhuman physicality couldn't be faked. To test, I confirmed through a few experiments that at least my ears and tail, and my mother's too, were very real. It seemed I had reincarnated into a beast race tribe, living high up in this vast forest. Well, first of all, I was doing my best to learn the language quickly, but I could only recognize names for now. When we finally arrived at the suspended cabin that was our home, I noticed how it was both carefully and simply built. Made of wood and leaves, it looked fragile but safe, with openings that let in the fresh wind. Still, I couldn't shake off a certain uneasiness. Will I fall if I get too distracted? As time went on, I started to understand the complexity of my new body. At only 3 weeks old, I was already able to crawl. This was fast, even by my race's standards, judging by the surprise my parents showed. There was a strange strength I still didn't know how to control. My movements were clumsy, and my strength disproportionate. One day, I was headed toward a water pot, moving too quickly and ended up twisting my arm. The pain was intense, surprising me, and I let out a whimper, which worried my mother, as I was usually a quiet baby. Actually, it's quite absurd. I just broke a bone, and all I did was whimper? Do babies normally break bones so easily? Or is something wrong with me? My mother left the house and returned in about 3 minutes. Alongside her, another figure appeared. A tall woman with pointed ears, bright eyes, and golden hair, wrapped in a soft cloak, leaned over me. After saying some words I didn't recognize, a warm light ran through my arm, and as I felt the pain vanish, a thought crept into my mind. Could she be some kind of healer? Who is this woman? And was that magic? Though I already suspected, knowing there was actual magic here was truly exciting. Having played so many games, I'd always imagined what it would be like to be inside a game myself. I looked at the woman I assumed was an elf, with shining eyes. Celine and other members of the tribe seemed to respect this mysterious woman. I looked at my mother and saw her grateful, yet worried expression. Well, they have the ability to heal. Maybe I can trust this world more than I thought. But now, who was this woman? I wanted to ask, but didn't know how. None of their words made sense to me yet. I just observed her, trying to understand what was happening. She spoke with Celine and other tribe members, but I understood nothing. All I knew was that she had healed me, and the pain that had consumed me had disappeared. My mother looked at me with a concerned face, but also with a look full of love. She didn't seem angry. No, she seemed grateful that I was okay, yet a bit worried about what had happened. Even with the pain fading, I still couldn't fully control my body. Something in me was different. I was stronger, faster, more wild. My instinct for survival and the urge to explore were intense. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to depend on anyone. I wanted to be strong. Over time, my mother took me to a tent to interact with other children. I felt a constant need to prove myself, to test my strength. It was an instinct that made me want to appear the strongest among those my age. This, however, wasn't going well. Other children seemed more fragile, smaller, and often ended up crying or getting scared. What's wrong with me? Why am I intimidating a bunch of kids? But they are really weak. Wait, that's not the point. An instinct to stand out and show what I was capable of burned within me, but I tried to control it. I would need to be stronger in this world, and for that, I would need to adapt and learn everything I could, even if it was at the pace of this small, beastly body. Celine, my mother, watched over me with immense patience, even when I caused small incidents. There was a tenderness in the way she handled me, gently pulling me away from anything dangerous or calming me with a soft touch. Her touch, even without words, conveyed a sense of peace I couldn't fully understand. One day my father, at least that's how I called him in my heart, came to check on me. He was a strong presence, always with a serious expression, yet there was a respectful look in his eyes. Somehow, I felt that he was proud of me, even without saying a word. When he placed his hand on my head, I felt something new, perhaps a sense of pride. It was as if he saw potential in me that I didn't yet understand. I truly missed my former life. I spent so much time with my new mother because she reminded me of my mother from before. I wondered if my friends missed me. Kazuki was probably annoyed that I'd left just when he was about to become a father. I hoped Yuka had taken over my project. It was almost finished, and I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else taking credit for something I'd worked so hard on. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew that this body and this world were now my reality. I didn't know my own name until I heard it repeated to me several times, Rigor. Something inside me said that this name was part of who I was now. I reborn in a new world with a strength I didn't yet know how to control, and a fate that seemed to be calling me. I didn't fully understand everything around me yet, but one thing was certain. I was Rigor Adoldia, a new being in a new world, striving to adapt and find my path forward. There I was, hair blowing in the wind, head held high and chest puffed out, gazing at the vast green expanse from the top of a tree, an epic scene, at least in my mind. Because I noticed my mother laughing behind me, genuinely finding my attempt at looking heroic, despite my size, to be cute. It had been a little over a year since I reincarnated into this world, and every day brought a new challenge and discovery. From my first movements to finally being able to stand and walk, I felt that I was making progress. Today, I can run, and even though I'm not as fast as an adult, considering my size, it's already something quite impressive. I may be small, but every step, every run through the forest, is a reminder that I can grow and improve. My strength was also not typical for someone my age. If I had to estimate, I'd say I had the strength of a 6 or 7-year-old from my previous world, something remarkable for my small, still developing body. My family and the rest of the tribe noticed this quickly, especially when I was able to move things that no one would expect someone my age to be able to lift. I thought it would be wiser to hide this strength, but every time someone was surprised by it, I felt a strange but pleasant sensation. And since this strength had only been beneficial so far, I decided not to hide it. I could feel my muscles adapting, as if this body were quickly adjusting to some internal need to grow stronger. Another detail was my vision. My golden eyes, different from the red ones most of the tribe had, seemed to go beyond just a change in color. I could see more clearly and from greater distances. When I focused, I sometimes saw something around people, almost like an aura. Since this was a world of magic, I thought it might be one of those aura powers from anime, or maybe just mana, since I could see this aura more clearly around the warriors of the tribe. On one occasion, I was watching my father and another warrior from the tribe train. He was strong, not just strong, his movements were truly superhuman. I focused hard because I could see the aura flowing through their bodies as they fought, but after 10 minutes of intense concentration, everything began to spin, and I passed out. I woke up hours later, and from what I could understand from my mother's conversation with Verdia, the elven healer who had treated my arm, I had suffered a mild manner exhaustion. Since then, my mother has been even more cautious with me, even limiting my time outside, which was unusual because she had always encouraged me to go out. I admit, I was a little disappointed. Being stuck inside when there was so much to explore, it wasn't easy for me to accept. But my disappointment didn't last long when torrential rain started falling across the region. Apparently, this was normal. The Great Forest experiences seasonal rains that flood the forest floor. At least I discovered why we live in the treetops. The best thing, however, happened recently. I'm finally starting to understand the language. It took a while, but after hearing so many conversations and with Celine eagerly teaching me, I was starting to get the hang of the words. My speech still needed improvement, but little by little, I could communicate. And with that came new opportunities. One morning, while my mother was talking to Verdia in the simple house we lived in, my mother stepped into another room, and I quietly approached. Verdia was sitting next to a small fire, drinking tea she had made herself. She looked so calm and serene, which fascinated me. "Have you been recovering well, Rigger?" Verdia said when she saw me approach, her voice soft but firm. "Do you feel any discomfort in your arm?" "No, it doesn't hurt," I replied after a moment to process my words. Verdia nodded with a pleased smile. "If you feel manner exhaustion again, tell your mom to call me. I have a theory about what it could be." I was mesmerized. That smile was so bright, like the sun. I had never seen anything so beautiful and pure. Damn baby body. She'll never take me seriously with this appearance. I didn't want the conversation to end there, so without thinking, I approached and asked, "How did you do that with my arm?" My voice was filled with curiosity. Verdia looked at me, smiling with a kindness that seemed genuine but also distant, as if she knew my journey had only just begun. "Magic," she started, tracing a strange circle with her finger on the table. "It's not something that can be easily taught, little Rigger. It requires patience, control, and most importantly, understanding. It's an energy that flows through the world, but there's much you need to learn to truly feel it." I stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. Maybe one day, I would understand this energy. But for now, I simply admired her ability, wondering how useful it might be. At that moment my father, Hontara Doldia, appeared in the doorway, interrupting our conversation. He motioned for me, and when I turned, his expression was serious but with a curious gleam in his eyes. "Come on, Rigger. I have something I want you to take part in," he said, as he walked out of the house again. How rude. I quickly said goodbye and trotted after my father. When we reached a clearing, I saw about 10 children, around 3 or 4 years old, by my estimate, along with some adults and older children talking and laughing as they watched the younger ones. An old man, whom I remembered was called Tyro, was organizing the children into a line. The mood was lively, and I could see some of the kids mocking me. One of the older children looked at me with a sneering smile. "Hey, are you the monster kid?" he said, crossing his arms. I looked at him for a moment before ignoring him and glancing at my father, uncertain. This seemed to irritate him, but I kept ignoring him. My father then explained that this was a small race with the younger children of the tribe, a sort of tradition, and he brought me early because he thought I'd be able to handle it. He left me with the other kids and went off to talk to the others. Ignoring the kids trying to get my attention, I looked at the course, which led deeper into the forest. As I prepared, motivation and anticipation began to surge through my body. By this point, I had already realized that the instincts of this new body were very strong, heavily influencing my decisions, whether it was my instant attachment to my new mother or my respect for my father's presence of strength. I definitely hadn't thought like this before I died. These instincts also came with a drive to be strong, to be better than my peers. Sure, I practiced martial arts in my past life, but it was just a hobby. I never wanted to be the best at it. With this body though, although I wasn't sure, if I weren't a rational person, I might have been following these instincts and become closer to a beast than a human. But this feeling wasn't just about my family. I felt an unexpected connection with the other children, with the trees, and even with the earth beneath my feet. Every day, the tribe's environment seemed less strange, less like a place I had been thrown into, and more like a home. I felt like I belonged there, and when I heard the laughter of the other children and the shouts of adults calling for their kids, something deep within me responded to it. Even though my rational mind tried to ignore it, my senses, my body, and even my heart felt increasingly in sync with everything around me. This sense of belonging was unsettling. I had never been so connected to the idea of family and tribe in my previous life. I only had 2 family members I cared about, my mother and my aunt, and a few close friends. Here my heart and mind were in constant conflict. While my rational side tried to maintain distance, my instincts embraced this new life with an almost ravenous intensity. And this internal struggle grew every time I looked around. The Rigger who had been reborn here was more than just a reflection of the Aoi Hiroto I had been before. He was a complex blend of my bestial instincts, my human rationality, and the environment I now called home. It was as though with each step, I was being shaped by forces far beyond my understanding, something as wild as it was ancient. And perhaps at some point, I had begun to find an answer to who I really was now. But for now, winning this race won't hurt, so let's go. Hey, are you listening? One of the kids called out to me. With the signal from Tyro, the children started to run, and I followed them, leaving the talkative child behind. He started running behind. The race began, and like a flock of arrows shot into the air, the children darted into the forest. I was among them, my clothes ready, my mind focused, but my body still small and in development. Since it was in the forest, it wouldn't just be a test of strength, it would be a mix of speed, dexterity, and cunning. The first part of the course was simple, but the dense trees and the roots extending across the ground created a web that only an agile body could navigate. The first real obstacle was a series of thorny bushes. The children ahead of me began to stumble, their steps slowing as they tried to dodge or carefully pass through. I, however, already knew what to do. Using the momentum of my short legs, I jumped, my muscles responding with more strength than I expected. It was as though my body had been trained for these challenges. I passed through easily, not getting caught in the thorns, and gained several meters. As I ran, I felt my instincts sharpen. I knew I had the strength, but it wouldn't be enough. My legs were much shorter, and I was at a disadvantage. I needed to be smarter. The next obstacle appeared quickly, a stream, with a series of rocks forming a path. I relied on my increasingly sharp vision, clearly distinguishing which stones were usable, and jumped nimbly across the path. As I moved forward, the terrain became more difficult. The dense vegetation and the wet, soggy ground started to make the path slippery, but this didn't slow me down. I knew I couldn't stop if I wanted to keep the lead I had gained. The last major obstacle appeared right in front of me, a massive rock blocking the way. It was probably meant to be avoided, but I was already making good progress, and I wasn't sure I could reach the end in time by taking the traditional route. I decided to trust my strength, gathered my determination, and leaped forward, feeling the wind against my skin and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. As one of my feet barely grazed the top of the rock, the tree signaling the end of the race came into view. A large tree that we all had to reach and strike with our claws. It was an old tradition of the tribe, a test of strength and skill, and the first child to reach the tree and make a claw strike on the trunk would be considered the winner. Looking to the side, the others were catching up, but I was closer. The sound of heavy breathing and hurried footsteps couldn't distract me now. I would probably strike first. My instincts flared. I could feel a strange energy, albeit faint, in my body, a life force pushing me forward. I looked at the tree, its thick branches and its trunk already carved with marks from generations of small claws. With a surge of energy, I made the final sprint, feeling light, as if the very ground was pushing me forward. When I reached the base of the tree, I jumped and, with all the strength I had built up, struck the trunk with my claws in a victorious roar, which probably sounded more adorable than fierce. The impact echoed through the forest, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The others stopped, staring in surprise, and I knew I had won. Rigor, the little one who had been underestimated, had overcome the obstacles and come in first. As the others began to arrive, one by one, they all looked at me with a mixture of surprise and respect. Taze, the boy who had called me monstrous earlier, arrived second, but he didn't look upset. On the contrary, he seemed impressed. Huntar, my father, was watching from a distance with a serious expression, but when he saw my victory, his eyes lit up with a pride I had never seen before. And although this race didn't mean much, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment and pride. Rigor had won. And in that moment, I thought to myself that my journey had only just begun. POV Huntar Adoldia. My name is Huntar Adoldia, a warrior from the Doldia tribe. You could say I'm relatively strong. If I had to estimate, I'd say I'm at the level humans would consider advanced among warriors, which makes me one of the strongest in the tribe. I've never left the Great Forest, except for one time when I joined an expedition to rescue our enslaved people. It was also when I met and saved my wife, Celine Adoldia. Perhaps because she had been influenced by human society and had lived much of her life as a slave, she was different, but not in a bad way. When I saw the lifeless look in her eyes turn to radiant hope after I rescued her, I had already fallen in love. Celine didn't stop me when I confessed my love. It was more as though she had been eagerly waiting for it. She never spoke much about her time as a slave, saying it was a dark period, in contrast to her current cheerful and affectionate self. It was as if every second after that was making up for the lost years. But I wasn't complaining. It was that kindness and brightness that made me fall in love with her in the end. Our life reached its peak after the mating season. Celine was pregnant, and I was so excited, but I made sure to keep my exterior calm and serious. Celine, in contrast to what I expected, was calm and relaxed, not seeming worried at all, just genuinely happy. Her pregnancy wasn't without complications. The baby moved a lot, and with each movement came a wave of pain for Celine. It got serious enough for me to seek help from an elf healer, Rudeus, who owed me a favor. With her overseeing the pregnancy and casting healing spells when necessary, the baby was finally born. The birth itself wasn't difficult, just the tribe's midwife was there, and that was enough. When I saw him healthy, I was overjoyed. Watching Rigger grow up was like watching a storm form on the horizon, unpredictable, powerful, and significant. From a young age, he showed something special. His eyes, his reactions, his curiosity, and especially the intensity one felt whenever I paid attention to him. Once again, I wasn't complaining. My life couldn't have been more perfect. I had an heir, and his talent was astonishing. I was worried at first because he reminded me of Ghislaine, the beast girl from the Dodoldia tribe. Her feral instincts were so strong that she was more beast than man, and she really couldn't live in society. But fortunately, my son didn't have that problem. He was the complete opposite, very intelligent, learning and absorbing everything around him quickly. His immense strength and intelligence started making me think, maybe he would be the one to take the beast race to a new level. As a result, I began pushing him harder, giving him challenge after challenge, which he solved with masterful ease. I could never show much pride, but when I felt his gaze on me, I felt as if he could see right through me. My son was sometimes frightening. Another thing that surprised me, Rudeus, contrary to what she had intended, became attached to my son. She had initially planned to leave after confirming he was healthy, but due to his persistent attachment, she decided to stay a few more years until he grew up. Elves are strange when it comes to time. What feels like nothing to them could be years to us. She told me that my son might have talent for magic. I'm starting to wonder if there's anything he isn't good at. Except for those times when he's overtaken by his instincts, of course, where apparently all his cunning and intelligence vanish. I smiled as I remembered him running on all fours after a rabbit, as if it were his prey. His love for meat was evident. May the great fire's protection be in the place you seek. I call the bold heat of a torch here and now. Fireball. I did it. A child's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Rudeus had called me to follow her and Rigger to a small clearing to witness something. Now I could see a small fireball floating in front of my excited son. Rudeus, with her serene gaze and a smile on her face, turned to me and said, "I didn't expect less. He learns quickly." I shook my head, unable to take my eyes off him, stunned and shocked. "My son can cast magic at the age of 3. "Indeed, you can already consider yourself a beginner fire mage, little Rigger," Rudeus replied, lifting the boy into the air by his arms. My son looked as though he had been punched by an invisible force upon hearing the last part, but soon recovered and smiled. "Let's try the others now." And so on that day, my son became a beginner mage of fire, water, earth, and wind, struggling a bit with the last one, trying 3 times before succeeding. MC's POV these last 2 years have been filled with new discoveries, first and foremost, magic. After seeing my growing interest and insisting so much, Rudeus agreed to teach me, as long as I had my parents' approval. My father agreed easily, but my mother was more demanding. She declared that she would only allow me to learn magic once I could read and write, arguing that mages needed to be intellectually prepared. While this might have seemed like an obstacle, I took it as just another challenge. I had always been interested in languages, and the morning lessons with my mother quickly had me mastering the written language of the tribe. When I asked to learn the human language too, she was surprised but pleased with my insatiable curiosity. Another thing I was able to confirm was my theory about mana strengthening. After watching many of my father's fights, it became clear that many fighters enhanced their blows with mana. I tried to replicate the result during this time, but I didn't have much success until now. When I asked my father about it, he told me that this energy was called battle aura, something you acquired naturally through training. I didn't really need it at the moment, as my natural strength was growing faster every day, to the point where my strength already rivaled the adults in the tribe. But I didn't know how far it would take me, so I continued my battle aura training for now. The most significant discovery, however, came when I realized something extraordinary about my mana. One day, After focusing my gaze to the point of exhaustion and almost passing out from a lack of mana, I noticed that, when I recovered, I could keep my magic eye active for longer than before. This discovery led me to conduct several experiments, where I confirmed that whenever I completely drained my mana reserves in a day, they regenerated bigger the next day. When I shared this with Verdia, she was surprised, as she believed, like most mages, that the amount of mana was fixed since birth. I realized that this peculiarity could be a unique advantage, as long as I continued to use it strategically. These 2 years were full of discoveries and advancements, but I knew I still had much to learn. With each small victory, my curiosity grew, and I sought to learn more about this new world. In the following months, before I turned 3 and started my physical training with my father, I spent my days discovering new things. My mother, Celine, was tirelessly kind and loving, and her affection reflected in everything she did. When Verdia began teaching me magic, my mother was always close by, often watching with a look of pride or encouraging me with kind words. Verdia, in turn, was a well of patience. I felt comfortable asking questions, even when I knew they might seem obvious or annoying. One day, while learning fire magic, I asked, "Why does magic exist?" Verdia smiled. "I've always thought it exists to remind us that limits are meant to be challenged and that even the impossible can be shaped by the right hands. Controlling it is understanding its nature, but also respecting it. That's what separates a talented mage from a reckless fool." Those words stayed with me, and I applied them to other aspects of my life. It was a good philosophy to follow when it came to magic. The sound of the wind passing through the treetops filled the clearing where we were training. My father was focused, his voice firm as he adjusted my stance during a combat drill. As soon as he noticed my talent for magic, he began my hand-to-hand combat training, fearing that I might not find it as interesting. From what I understood, warrior training usually began at age 5, but he thought it wouldn't be a problem if it were me. Keep your center of gravity low, rigor. That way, you can resist the impact. The first drill was a strength contest. My father was much bigger and stronger than me, but I had something he didn't expect: knowledge of grappling from my past life. When he lunged to grab me, I quickly lowered myself, using his movement to seize his leg and pull it, unbalancing him for a moment. He laughed, surprised. "Interesting. Where did you learn this?" "I just thought quickly," I lied, trying to cover it up. Even so, he noticed something different. My approach was more strategic than instinctive, and that intrigued him. Gradually, I began incorporating more complex techniques, like holds and locks, which, although not perfect for my child's body, gave me an unexpected advantage. "You're small, but you fight like an experienced predator. That's rare for someone your age," he said as he knocked me down so quickly that I couldn't react. "Ag, you're getting better. Again." We trained until dusk, and by the end, he gave me a proud look. "You have much to learn, rigor. Remember, you may be strong, but you're small and inexperienced. Don't blindly rely on your strength," he said wisely. Of course I know that, but did he have to beat me so much? "I'm only 3 years old. This is child abuse. I'm calling the police." "Of course, father, I definitely won't forget that," I said with a sinister smile, which only looked strange on my child's face. At night, after dinner, came the moment I looked forward to most, sitting beside Verdia and my mother while they told stories of places beyond the great forest. Verdia started, as usual, drawing maps on the cabin floor with a stick. "Rigor, did you know that beyond this forest, there are lands so different they could seem like another world?" she asked as she made winding lines. "What are they like?" I asked, my curiosity growing. She smiled. "Meles, for example, is a kingdom of religious humans. Their cities are surrounded by tall walls, and many people there follow the laws of Saint Meles. They believe in order and purity, or at least, that's what they say." My mother, Celine, leaned in, adding, "But not everyone in the world follows those beliefs. The kingdom of Azura, on the central continent, is very different. They are the wealthiest and rule as a great monarchy. It's a place of intrigue and luxury, but also of inequality." Verdia continued, her tone more serious. "Little rigor, there's something you always need to be aware of in this world. There are those who see people like us, the beast race, as tools or objects. They're the slave traders." My mother sighed, the usual brightness in her eyes dimmed for a moment. "I was a slave myself, rigor. I've seen up close how they treat those they capture. That's why it's so important that you grow up knowing the value of freedom." These words resonated with me. While my body sought physical strength through training, my mind sought to understand what it meant to be just and strong. After 3 years living with these people, I noticed that despite their animalistic traits, they weren't so different from humans. The idea of others thinking they had the right to enslave them just because of their race seemed repugnant. But that wasn't something I could change in this world, at least not for now. During my explorations of the forest, I began to notice that the other children looked at me differently. Some started following me wherever I went. Maybe it was my unusual ability to think logically and strategically, or my strength, which surpassed theirs despite being the same age. When we played fight or explored the more dangerous areas of the forest, I instinctively took on the role of leader. "Let's go this way," I said, pointing to a less obvious route. "The rabbits tend to hide on this side, and the vegetation is denser, so we might find tracks." "How do you know that?" asked a boy named Karun, eyeing me suspiciously. "I observe," I replied, shrugging. "The forest speaks if you know how to listen." They laughed but followed my instructions, and we ended up finding what we were looking for. Thus, my position as leader began to solidify, even though I never asked for it. It was during a family dinner that my father mentioned something that stirred the entire tribe. "Guys is excited," Hantar started, with a light smile on his face. "His wife is pregnant." Celine beamed. "That's wonderful. The next generation of the Dodoldia clan is on the way." Hantar nodded, but his expression grew thoughtful. "Rouge is also expecting a child. 2 heirs to chiefs being born almost at the same time. This will strengthen the bonds between the clans." I fell silent, absorbing the information. I knew that these children would play an important role in the tribe's future, but I also wondered what kind of relationship we would have. My father said that the holy beast had also been born, but this will be kept secret from everyone until it is old enough. Legends say that this beast will join the hero who will save the world or something like that. I don't know how much I believe in this, but I guess I'll have to wait to see this holy beast first. During the quieter nights, I found myself thinking about what I wanted for myself in this world. I felt the desire to explore, to live adventures beyond the forest. But I also knew I had a responsibility to my family and my tribe. Strength without purpose is nothing, I remembered my mother's words. My decisions would be shaped by these stories, by these teachings. While my body longed for battles, my heart and mind sought a greater purpose. Something that would give meaning to the life I was given. It's been a few months since I turned 4 years old. Here, they don't celebrate birthdays annually like they do on Earth. Rudeus said it's because of the high death rate before the age of 5, which is a bit morbid to think about. In the tribe, it seems they only celebrate some kind of coming-of-age ceremony, but my mother wants to have a small celebration for my 5th, 10th, and 15th birthdays. Apparently, she saw a lot of this in human society and thought there was no reason not to celebrate. That morning, I decided it would be a day of achievement. I had just returned from a successful hunt, and for the first time, I wanted to prepare my meal without help. The idea seemed simple: roast the meat over the fire I summoned with magic. However, the result was disastrous. The meat was burnt on the outside and raw on the inside, and the smell was so strong that even the birds flew away. I chewed a small piece, trying to ignore the bitter taste, but gave up shortly after. "Maybe cooking isn't my calling," I muttered as I tried to erase the evidence of my failure before anyone saw. I sighed and added the experience to my list of lessons learned. At least in magic and combat, the progress was undeniable. Deciding to head home, I started running and jumping through the trees, leaping between roots and branches with the agility of a true Doldia. My father had already told me that if it was purely about physical strength, I had surpassed many of the warriors in the tribe, which made me curious about how much stronger I would become once I learned to use Battle Aura, a technique I had been making some progress with in my training recently. Wherever I passed, tribe members waved or gave curious glances. My name was already known by almost everyone, not only because of my magical and physical training, but also because of my constant habit of running through the forest. I had already become publicly known as the little genius of the Adoldia clan, praised for my strength and my ability to perform magic at such a young age. These comments made me proud, but I didn't let them go to my head. There was still so much to learn, and with the guidance of my father Verdia and Garu, each day was a new opportunity. I performed magic with a natural ease that even impressed Verdia, my patient and demanding teacher. She said she had seen many things, but never a child so young capable of understanding so many spells at such an age. Not that my life was limited to spells and magic words. In addition to my training with my father, I began learning the art of sword fighting from Geru, one of the best warriors in the tribe. There were two main fighting styles among the Doldia, one that used swords and various weapons, which I like to call the Doldia style, and the other that used only the body, with natural weapons like claws, fangs, and fists being the focus. My father didn't usually use a sword, but he explained that the Doldia techniques were a natural variation of the Northern God style. Many techniques of the Northern God style were actually attempts to copy the Doldia style. The fundamentals of the Doldia style focused more on enhanced senses, instincts, reflexes, and quick movements, making full use of the environment. Use the environment to your advantage, Rigger, Geru would always say. A fight is never just about strength or technique. It's perception, reflex, and adaptation. Rigger, a sword isn't just steel in your hand. It's an extension of your senses, my father once said while watching my training. I still felt more comfortable using my claws and body to fight. It just felt more natural to me. I simply had to follow my instincts blindly, and something good would come from it. That's how I spent most of my time. Running through the forest with other children, training with Geru and my father, and casting spells creatively became my routine, a routine that made my name known throughout the village. Current status: Fire Magic, Advanced Earth Magic, Advanced Water Magic, Intermediate Wind Magic, Intermediate Healing Magic, Intermediate Detoxification Magic, Beginner Howling Magic, Basic Northern God Style, Beginner Combat with Natural Weapons, Claws, Instincts, etc. Intermediate Intellectual Skills, Reading and Writing in Beast God Language and Human Language Mathematics, University Level Practical Skills, Excellent Hunter, Horrible Cook. My mana reserves were steadily growing. I didn't know if I was capable of casting a Saint tier spell yet, but I had to use several advanced tier spells to exhaust my mana. Even keeping my magic eye active all day wasn't enough anymore, though I didn't do that because it would be strange to constantly see magical power everywhere. Still, I always made sure to deplete my reserves, ensuring constant growth. After finishing another detoxification magic lesson, I sat next to Verdia under the shade of a tree. She was resting, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she watched me. I took the opportunity to ask something that had been bothering me. "Teacher, can I ask you something?" She gave me an amused look. "As long as it doesn't involve spells to make soup." I blushed. I often asked her about all kinds of random magic, but it really didn't make sense. There's magic to create a devastating tornado, but none for making soup. This world has evolved in constant war, so why only think about destructive magic? It's about how I use magic. When I learned Howling Magic, I realized it doesn't use incantations. Why do the other spells need them? Her expression grew serious. "You noticed that on your own?" she asked, looking surprised. "Yeah. It just feels natural. But why can't I do the same with fire or water magic, for example?" I rarely questioned her teaching methods because she seemed to know what she was doing, but I decided to ask just in case. Verdia thought for a moment before answering. Incantations help shape and direct mana. Think of them as instructions for your power. However, instinctive magic, like Howling Magic, is different. It comes from the spirit and the body, without needing words. So, does that mean I can use other magic without incantations? She smiled slightly. It's possible, but there are only records of very experienced people managing it. I've only met 3 such people in my entire life. They're rare. However, there's only one way to find out. Let's go to the clearing. The place was surrounded by tall trees and bathed in the soft sunlight. Verdia gestured for me to position myself. Let's start with something simple. Focus on a water spell, but without incantations. I don't have much to teach you about this since I don't have this ability, but try to replicate the feeling and say the incantation in your mind. It might help. I closed my eyes, feeling the mana flow like a current inside me. Normally, I say the words, but this time I kept silent. I visualized a sphere of water forming in my hand while thinking about the incantation. To my surprise, it appeared almost immediately. I did it! I exclaimed, looking at Verdia. Impressive. That's a rare skill, little Rigger. I was planning to have you try this when you were older, but it seems I underestimated your talent. She looked genuinely surprised this time. It was hard to get that expression from her. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I imagined a flame floating before me, dancing in the air. Once again, without saying a word, the mana responded. A small flicker of fire sparked, vibrant and warm. Verdia laughed, clearly impressed. Rigor, this is a truly special skill. You have a natural talent, so remember, how much you develop this ability depends on your effort. Keep in mind what I've taught you about magic, and just follow your own path. She hesitated for a moment, then said, Little Rigor, do you want to be my disciple? It would still be the same, but we would be bound by something greater than just teaching. I noticed a hint of melancholy, but I was excited. Of course, Master. I would love to. She smiled. That's when a chill ran down my spine. What was that? I murmured, instinctively activating my senses. Verdia noticed it too. Something's wrong. Stay alert. We decided to investigate the surroundings and found strange footprints marking the ground. Boot prints, as if they had been made in haste. This isn't good. Verdia said, her tone serious. Is this what my father is investigating? I asked. Over the past few days, a subtle tension had begun to build among the warriors, and my father seemed to be in the middle of an investigation. Yes. She nodded, but her eyes were filled with concern. Although I was excited, there was something in her voice that hinted at worry. Now that I thought about it, she'd been like this all day. I wondered if this was what had been bothering her. When we returned home, we found my father, Hontar, with his arms crossed, his expression stern. He looked at me for a moment before speaking. Rigor, Verdia. Something is happening in the forest. Guys came to find me. He says there's strange movement to the north. Soon, Guys Didoldia appeared, his imposing figure filling the doorway. Hontar, we need to investigate. These movements aren't natural, and I fear they might signal bigger problems. Understood, my father replied, turning to me. Rigor, stay home. Don't go out for anything. But Father Dash, I tried to protest, but he interrupted me. This is non-negotiable. Stay and protect your mother if necessary. He said, looking at my mother. As I was still processing his words, Verdia stepped closer, her face bearing the same seriousness. I've also received news. The elves have called me back to the village. It seems that if anything happens here, they might be affected as well. My father sighed deeply. Then go, my father said, nodding. They will need you as much as we need our defenses here. With those words, the atmosphere grew heavy with concern. My father and Guys left for the north, and my mother and Verdia began to pack their bags for the journey. As they spoke, an uneasy feeling grew inside me. Something was wrong, and I knew my peace was running out of time. Night had fallen, and the village was silent. The wind passing through the trees brought with it an uncomfortable chill, but it wasn't the cold that made me uneasy. It was the moment of farewell. Verdia was standing outside our house, going over her belongings as my mother, Celine, watched in silence. I approached slowly, trying to find the right words to say. Are you sure you need to go? I asked, trying to hide the worry in my voice. Verdia looked up, a gentle smile appearing on her face. Yes, little Rigor. The elves need me now, just as you and your mother need Hontar and Guys to protect the forest. I can't ignore their call. My mother, who had been quiet until then, stepped forward and held Verdia's arm. Take care out there, Verdia. We know how dangerous the situation can get, but don't forget, the tribe will always be here for you. Thank you, Celine, Verdia replied, gently touching her hand. I'll return as soon as I can. Verdia turned to me, and her eyes seemed to shine, as if she was trying to capture every detail of the moment. Rigor, listen to your mother. And more importantly, keep practicing. You have everything you need to become someone incredible. I hesitated for a moment, but then spoke up. I'll train. I'll protect everyone here while you're gone. Just come back as soon as you can. I really liked her, I truly did. She had taught me so much since I arrived in this world, and there was this gentleness and elegance about her, an aura that was truly hypnotic. She smiled, but there was something melancholic in her expression. Don't worry. I'll come back. And when I do, I want to hear all about your progress. Suddenly, she knelt down, holding my face with both hands. Remember, Rigger, even when you're alone, you're never truly alone. Your strength lies in the people you love, and they are always with you in some way. My words caught in my throat, and all I could do was nod. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently as if to offer comfort. Verdia, you are already part of our family. Go in peace, but know we'll always be here if you need us, my mother said firmly. Verdia stood up, adjusting the quiver on her back, and gave one last look at both of us. You're my family too. I'll come back. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her silhouette swallowed by the darkness of the forest. We stood there, my mother and I, in silence, staring at where Verdia had gone. Finally, my mother broke the silence. She's strong, Rigger. But we are strong too. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. I nodded, but something inside me still weighed heavily. The night felt darker than ever. If danger is waiting, how can I stand still? I thought, feeling the unease take over me. As I walked back home after another training session, I spotted a group of children playing near one of the smaller clearings. They were laughing and running, lost in their games. One of the kids, a boy named Killian, saw me and ran toward me. Rigger, did you see how I climbed that tree? Yeah, Killian. You're getting really good at that, I replied with a smile. As he looked at me, proud of himself, an idea came to mind. With dangers looming, maybe it was time to prepare the younger ones for whatever might come. I approached Killian, placing a hand on his shoulder. Killian, I need you to gather our group. Call everyone, I want to talk to you all. He blinked, confused, but didn't question me. Okay, Rigger. I'll gather everyone. Shortly after, around 30 children, ranging from 3 to 7 years old, were gathered around me. I looked at them, feeling the weight of responsibility. Listen up, all of you, I began, my voice firm. There are dangers in the forest. My father and the other adults are investigating, but in the meantime, we need to be ready. You're all weak, and I want to teach you how to defend yourselves. There were murmurs among the group, some curious, others frightened. This means we're going to train, I continued. You'll learn to run faster, climb better, and use your senses like true members of the tribe. And who knows, I might even teach you a little magic. The murmurs stopped, replaced by excited looks. Killian was the first to raise his hand. When do we start? I smiled. Tomorrow morning. Get ready, because I'm going to make you sweat. The children laughed, some clapping, and the group's energy shifted to excitement. In the back of my mind, I knew it was more than just a game. Preparing them was my way of keeping an eye on things, even if it was just to buy time until the adults resolved the issue. At that moment, another child arrived, panting. Rigger, there's a group of adventurers coming. They're approaching from the West Trail. The warriors of the tribe are there now. My mind went into overdrive. I didn't know what this meant, but I knew it wasn't something to be ignored. Without hesitation, I turned and began to run toward the village entrance. My heart raced as I wondered what these strangers wanted from us. Upon arriving, he found the tribe's warriors alongside a group of strangers. In the clearing, Lonar Dodoldia, the warrior responsible for the tribe's security, was exchanging blows with an unknown man. Instinctively, Rigger activated his magic eye. The world around him shifted. The stranger was tall and athletic, with black hair tied into a ponytail and a focused posture. He wielded a long, elegant sword that seemed to dance through the air. His movements were precise, combining direct strikes with a fluid style that Rigger couldn't entirely recognize. There was something deeply unsettling about him, a strange instinctual feeling Rigger couldn't quite explain. The fighters exchanged intense, but clearly friendly blows. The sound of steel clashing reverberated through the air, and the crowd watched in fascination. Yet, Rigger felt something stirring deep within him, an aggression that began to take over his senses. When Lonar stepped back after deflecting a particularly quick strike, Rigger couldn't hold back any longer. Letting out a roar, he charged at the swordsman with explosive force, aiming directly for his throat. Rigger's attack was swift, but the stranger didn't flinch. Instead, another figure intercepted him. Before he could land his strike, Rigger was firmly grabbed and thrown to the ground in a motion as smooth as a flowing river. He tried to resist, but the strength holding him down was unshakable. "Calm down, boy," said a deep, commanding voice. "No one here is your enemy." Looking up, Rigger saw an older man with short graying brown hair and an imposing presence. He held his sheathed sword at his side, clearly ready to act if needed, though his expression remained calm and controlled. Rigger. Lonar rushed over, placing a firm hand on the young boy's shoulder. Stop this. They are not enemies, it's just a friendly sparring match. Rigger was breathing heavily, shame burning his face as he slowly stood, avoiding the eyes of those around him. I'm sorry, it was instinctive. Ha! You tried to kill me over an instinct, scoffed the swordsman. Lonar, still stern, crossed his arms. If he did, it's because he saw something in you that we don't. Our instincts rarely fail. The swordsman raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention to the other members of his group, gathered a bit farther back. As tensions eased, Fendrel formally introduced himself and his group to the villagers. I am Fendrel Ashbrand, the leader of this group, the Red Dragon's Breath. A pleasure to finally meet you all, he began, smiling warmly as he addressed the wary villagers. We are Rank S adventurers, and our journey began with a rescue mission. However, what brought us here goes beyond that. Pausing, he observed their reactions before continuing. I am a sword saint, and my mission started when a beastfolk slave saved my life during a battle. I was gravely wounded, and despite her terrible condition, she cared for me. Before her death, she asked me to free her son and bring him back to the Great Forest. Upon arriving here, we learned of the challenges your tribe is facing. We couldn't simply walk away. That's why I've decided to help, and my group chose to follow me here. Fendrel's gaze softened as he looked at Rigger, as if wanting the boy to understand his intentions. The debt is mine, and I see it as my responsibility to repay it. He gestured toward his companions. Darien, the swordsman, gave a simple bow. I'm Darien, swordsman. Not as skilled as Fendrel, but my blade is sharp. Irina, the elven archer, spoke with an indifferent tone. I'm Irina, archer. She eyed Rigger, noting the distrust still present in his gaze. Gorin, the dwarf, raised his voice jovially, trying to lighten the atmosphere. Name's Gorin, the drunkard of the forge. Not a saint, but good with an axe and a barrel of ale. Marla, the healer, followed with a calming presence. I'm Marla, healer. If anyone needs care, I'm here. Lastly, a halfling introduced himself with a mischievous grin. Zen, thief. A young beastfolk child hiding behind him piped up shyly, I'm Jannar. The village's reception was far from warm. Despite Jannar's account, which confirmed Fendrel's story and eased some tension, the villagers remained skeptical. Having lived in isolation and with internal struggles, they watched the adventurers' every move with suspicion. Outsiders weren't easily trusted, especially during such uncertain times. Who are these people? What do they want here? One elder murmured, glaring at the group. Our tribe has its own warriors. We don't need strangers. Even with Fendrel's explanation, doubt lingered. It was hard for the villagers to believe that a group of adventurers would come all this way out of pure altruism. Rigger felt the unease in the air. He too harbored reservations, particularly about the swordsman Darien, whose earlier sparring match had set him on edge. Yet, Fendrel's calm demeanor and sincerity made Rigger hesitate in outright dismissing him. Over the days that followed, Rigger observed the adventurers closely. Darien was almost too composed, revealing little about himself. Irina maintained a detached curiosity about the villagers, never venturing too close. The others, more willing to engage, were met with cool politeness but little warmth. Still, Rigger couldn't shake the feeling that Fendrel carried a unique burden, one that resonated with him. Perhaps there was more to this group than met the eye. As the days passed, Rigger began to hope the tribe's warriors would return soon. Their presence would make him feel more secure amidst the growing tension. One day, during one of his training sessions, Fendrel watched as Rigger moved with the natural weapons inherited from his Doldia lineage. His sharp claws and the instinctive agility of his body allowed him to adapt to improvised combat styles. Fendrel crossed his arms, studying the young warrior as he blocked and dodged Geru's attacks. You have what I'd call natural talent, Fendrel remarked. Rigger paused, looking at him curiously. Talent for what? For the sword god style. It's the way you move, direct, efficient, focused on ending a fight with a single lethal blow. Though Fendrel seemed impressed, he didn't dwell on the comment. To him, talent only mattered if paired with hard work. Don't let it go to your head. Talent is just a seed. Whether it grows depends entirely on you. Rigor didn't respond. While he enjoyed using a sword, he found it far easier to improve by fighting with his claws and fists. As the weeks went by, Rigor became more involved in the village's daily routines, including helping younger children learn the basics of combat and patrolling the area. Initially, it was just a distraction, something to fill his time when he wasn't training with Garu or pushing his own limits. But soon, he realized he enjoyed teaching. Focus on your balance, Rigor told a small group. If your feet aren't steady, any strike will throw you off. The children looked up to him with admiration, eagerly mimicking his stances and movements. Despite his youth, Rigor already stood out as someone with the strength and skill of a seasoned warrior. As the months passed and he turned 5, Celine held a small celebration for just the two of them. She gifted him a ring engraved with a wolf design. The adventurers were gradually integrating into the village's routine. Rigor, though still wary of Darien, began training regularly with Fendrel. Despite his growing respect for the group leader, Rigor couldn't ignore something peculiar. Whenever he activated his magic eye during their training sessions, he noticed Fendrel's battle aura was unlike anything he had ever seen. It's sharp, Rigor reflected during a break. Every movement is like a blade, but controlled. It's as if he doesn't waste a single drop of energy. One day, after an especially intense sparring session, Fendrel commented, "You've got monstrous strength for someone your age." He rubbed his shoulder where a strike from Rigor's claws had torn part of his light armor. If you learn to control it, you could become something truly dangerous. In a good way. Rigor felt a mix of pride and frustration. Despite his strength, he knew Fendrel still outclassed him in technique and experience. My strength means nothing if I can't use it properly, he thought. During training, Rigor began to blend his natural grappling knowledge, something he had learned in his past life, with the instinctive combat techniques of his new body. In one bout, he managed to take down the veteran swordsman by grabbing his arm during an attack, twisting his body, and pinning him to the ground. Of course, he knew that if Fendrel had been serious, his head would have been severed before he realized it. Interesting, Fendrel said as he stood up with a grin. You don't limit yourself to one style. That flexibility will take you far. It's not like I choose to do this, Rigor replied, panting. It feels like my body just reacts. Then start training your reactions too, Fendrel retorted. Reacting without thought is useful, but reacting with intent is what separates a common fighter from a master. Apparently, there were two kinds of warriors, instinctual and rational. Fendrel categorized Rigor as a pure instinctual fighter and noted that, while this approach made initial progress easier, it wouldn't take him as far in the long run. Beyond combat, Rigor began practicing chantless magic, something he still didn't fully understand. During a solitary training session, he focused on channeling mana into a simple fire land spell. By concentrating all his energy into a single burst, the spell became intense and powerful but left him exhausted. I need more control. Rigor muttered to himself as he watched the smoke slowly dissipate. The more mana I pour in, the stronger the spell gets. This could be useful for short battles, but I need to find a way to use it strategically. Over time, he realized he could quickly deplete his mana reserves by overloading spells. This prompted him to think of new ways to combine his combat abilities with magic, something that could become a decisive advantage. In one of the rare moments of rest, Rigor sat beside his mother, Celine, as she wove a fishing net. He hesitated before speaking. Mom, have you ever felt like you weren't yourself? Like something inside you was pushing you to do things you didn't understand? Celine paused, looking at him with a warm, understanding smile. Sometimes, she replied. I think it's part of who we are, Rigor. That wildness, some are born with more of it, others with less. We're connected to nature, and nature isn't always rational. But you have something special. You have a choice. Rigor was silent for a moment. Mom, can you teach me how to cook? She burst out laughing. Her words lingered in Rigor's mind, echoing as he continued his training and patrols around the village. As time passed, Fendrel gradually earned the trust of the tribe's leaders. The adventurer leader maintained a friendly and respectful demeanor, never forcing interactions. He respected Rigger's space and often engaged in small conversations about combat and strategy with the warriors, asking about the tribe's fighting styles without ever questioning Gustav de Doldia's authority. Rigger was surprised by Fendrel's approach. His mother and Verdia had told him that sword god-style practitioners were usually arrogant and unrestrained. Yet, Fendrel didn't act superior. He was more of a battle companion. He corrected Rigger's movements gently, never in a rush to teach but always with wise words. As the days went by, Rigger trained with Fendrel more often. He didn't know exactly what to expect, but the experience was overwhelmingly positive. Fendrel's technique was refined, and Rigger learned a great deal just by observing him. Rigger realized that Fendrel wasn't just a skilled swordsman, but also an incredible strategist. Sometimes, when Fendrel demonstrated more advanced techniques, Rigger felt as though he was missing something, as if failing at something that should have been simple. But instead of becoming frustrated, he dedicated himself even more to his training. With every sparring match, he felt something changing inside him, though he couldn't yet identify what it was. "You're already at an advanced level, Rigger, at least in your style," Fendrel once commented after an intense training session. "But you need to learn to control not just your strength, but also your emotions. Battle isn't just about brute force. Like I said, you've gotten this far relying purely on instinct, but it'll be hard to progress much further that way." "I know," Rigger replied, breathing heavily. "It's hard not to follow my instincts when they feel like the best move in a fight. It's been years since I left the Sword Sanctuary, but I heard there's a new Sword King called the Black Wolf. She's also from the Beast race. I don't know if she had the same problem, but if you ever want to advance further, you could seek her out, or go directly to the Sword Sanctuary. You might even have a chance to become the Sword God's disciple." Each day, Rigger became more aware of how far he was from mastering his strength. But training with Fendrel was the right path. He could pinpoint Rigger's mistakes and tell him exactly what needed to be done to improve further. Rigger was steadily becoming a stronger leader, increasingly aware of his abilities. His training sessions with the village children continued, but now he incorporated techniques he had learned from Fendrel, blending grappling maneuvers into his combat style. His ability to immobilize opponents before delivering a decisive blow was unconventional but remarkably effective. He noticed that his beastly nature was becoming harder to control, yet it seemed to manifest precisely when he needed it most. Over time, Rigger also grew closer to Irina, the elven archer from Fendrel's group. Initially cold and distant, she eventually warmed up when she realized that he was simply curious about her mentor, Verdia. Now he knew her full name, Verdia Solarion. The forest was quiet that night. Rigger's footsteps were muffled by the dense undergrowth, his senses sharpened by months of training and patrols. He moved cautiously, yet his mind remained on high alert. Slave traffickers and smugglers still posed a constant threat in the area, and his mission was clear: patrol and protect the village. As he neared the forest's edge, where the terrain opened up, distant voices caught his attention, sharpening his hearing. His magical eye activated instinctively, and his vision focused on the source of the sound. For figures moved briskly through a clearing, their pace urgent. Rigger crouched low, hidden among the foliage, and observed. What he saw made his jaw tighten with restrained anger. Two smugglers were carrying beast children, bound and teary-eyed. A wounded beast woman was slung over one man's shoulder, her body limp. The other man held her upright by a rope tied around her neck. The children, though visibly terrified, resisted as much as they could, their defiance a testament to their spirit despite their dire situation. Slavers, Rigger thought, his blood boiling. They won't leave here alive. With his heart pounding, he activated his magic eye and locked onto his targets. His perception sharpened, and the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of sweat mixed with fear filled his senses. Two of the men carried swords and appeared reasonably skilled, though still no match for him. Nonetheless, caution was essential. The man leading the group barked, "Hurry up! The crossing will be tough if we don't move faster." The other man glanced around nervously, but kept walking. "Damn beast folk. One more ambush, and we're done for. Let's get this over with." Rigger crept closer, a shadow in the darkness. With a deep, guttural growl, he unleashed his howling magic. A powerful, deafening wave of sound rippled through the clearing. The smugglers staggered, clutching their ears as they reeled from the sonic assault. The beast children and woman winced, but the slavers were left completely vulnerable. Rigger pounced like a predator from the shadows, moving with surprising speed for someone his size. His first target, a man wielding dual swords, tried to react but was too slow. Rigger's clawed hand wrapped around his throat, his sharp nails digging into flesh. A savage smile crossed Rigger's face as his beastly instincts took over. With a brutal squeeze, his claws tore through the man's neck, ripping flesh and severing arteries. The slaver crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Nearby, the second swordsman, still dazed, struggled to regain his footing. Rigger turned to him with predatory precision, conjuring a flaming spear in his hand. Without hesitation, he hurled the spear, and it struck the man square in the chest. The explosion of flames consumed him in an instant, his screams echoing into the night. The remaining two slavers panicked. One attempted to flee, but Rigger was faster. He sprinted after the man, tackling him with monstrous strength. Pinning him against a tree, Rigger's claws tore into his throat, silencing him forever. The final slaver, desperate, drew a knife and turned toward the beast woman. She was too weak to resist as he raised the blade, but before it could descend, Rigger was there. In a blur, he struck the man with an open-handed claw swipe, the force enough to send him sprawling. The knife clattered to the ground, and Rigger delivered a final fatal blow. The clearing grew silent except for the labored breathing of the rescued captives. Rigger turned to the children and the beast woman, his earlier rage subsiding. His predatory expression softened as he crouched near them. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but steady, as he began to heal their wounds with magic. Cutting their bonds carefully, he freed them. The children, still trembling, stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The beast woman, though gravely injured, managed a faint smile of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Rigger nodded solemnly. He picked up the two children, cradling them gently in his arms as the woman limped alongside him, following his lead back toward safety. His thoughts churned. This was his first kill, yet it felt natural, instinctual, a necessary act to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. But a small, primal part of him relished the hunt. Months passed with several small skirmishes around the village. Each time, the tribe's warriors swiftly handled the threats. Finally, the expeditionary warriors returned to the village. Their arrival brought both relief and unease. Exhaustion was etched into their faces, and it was clear that their journey had been grueling. Rigger stood beside Fendrel as the returning warriors entered. The initial tension between the tribe and the adventurers had eased over time, thanks in no small part to Fendrel's calm demeanor and their actions in protecting the village. Gustav, the village chief, exchanged a knowing look with Fendrel before addressing Rigger. "Come with us. You've earned your place in this meeting," Gustav said. Rigger nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever news the warriors had brought back, he was ready to face it. The weight of responsibility hung heavy in the air, but for Rigger, it was yet another step on his path to becoming stronger, for his tribe and for himself. The familiar figures of Guise, Hontar, and a small group of warriors appeared on the horizon. In the village, murmurs of anticipation quickly gave way to worried expressions. Children ran to their mothers, while the elders exchanged tense glances. Guise, the seasoned tribal veteran, walked at the forefront, his demeanor serious and his eyes scanning the village. Beside him, Hontar bore the hardened expression of someone who had faced difficult days. Their leather armor was worn, marked with fresh battle scars that told their own story. Gustav, the tribe's leader, quickly approached, his eyes scrutinizing the group. "Just you." His voice came out colder than he intended, but the question was unavoidable. Guise stopped and motioned for the other warriors to disperse and rest. Turning to Gustav, he responded gravely. The others stayed behind. There were many problems. Hontar, standing beside him, added, "We found clear signs of movement from the underworld. Large groups. Too large for us to face directly. Part of our group remained at the borders to monitor them, but we don't know if they'll return," Guise finished, his voice heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The news hit the village like a stone. Villagers began murmuring, and a tense atmosphere spread quickly. Some mothers clutched their children tightly, while others searched for answers in the warriors' eyes. Gustav stood silent for a moment, assessing the situation before commanding, "Come to the central tent. We need to discuss this immediately." "Fendrel, Rigger, you're coming too." "Who are they?" Guise asked sharply, glaring at Fendrel and his group, his body tense. After months of fighting slavers, it was difficult to mask his bloodlust and disdain. Gustav cut him off. They've been helping defend the tribe these past months. So wipe that look off your face and offer your thanks. Hearing this, the warriors calmed, and Guys offered an apology. Inside the central tent, the atmosphere was heavy. Besides Gustav, Guys, and Huntar, several of the tribe's most experienced warriors were present. Rigger had been allowed to participate due to his strength and recent contributions. It was the first time he had witnessed something so serious, but he knew this was an important moment to understand what was happening. Gustav looked directly at Guys. Explain in detail. What did you see? Guys crossed his arms, taking a deep breath before replying. We found organized groups at key points along the borders. These aren't just merchants or common hunters. They carry symbols of known underworld factions. They're armed and appear to be preparing for something big. We tried to send messages to other tribes, but we've received no response. Huntar added, the worst part is that they know about us. We encountered ambushes and signs that they've been monitoring our movements, and they don't seem to care that we're aware of it. Gustav furrowed his brow, processing the information. And the rest of the group? Why did they stay behind? They volunteered to continue surveillance and buy us time. They're also tasked with warning us if anything happens. We know the risks, but we had no other choice, Guys replied, his tone laced with regret. As the adults discussed, Rigger couldn't shake a feeling of urgency. He recalled the stories about slavers, but had never imagined the threat could be so close. His mind raced as he decided to speak up. If we know where they are, why don't we strike first? Rigger asked, his voice cutting through the tension in the tent. All eyes turned to him. Some were surprised, others skeptical. Guys looked at the young warrior with a firm expression, though not disdainful. Attacking now would be suicide. They need so much preparation because we have the advantage in these forests. If we attack recklessly, we'll lose that edge. We don't know how many there are or how well equipped they might be. Huntar nodded in agreement. We need more information before acting. Any rash move could cost us dearly. Despite their words, Rigger felt that something was being withheld. The meeting dragged on as Gustav and the other leaders debated their next steps. The possibility of an attack on the village seemed increasingly real, and the distrust toward the recently arrived adventurers only added to the tension. When the meeting finally concluded, Guys placed a hand on Rigger's shoulder as they exited the tent. You're growing fast, boy. But remember, patience is as powerful a weapon as strength. Rigger nodded, though his clenched fists betrayed his lingering unease. As night fell, the young warrior couldn't help but look toward the horizon, where the other tribal warriors still remained. Perhaps they were fighting for their lives. He also thought constantly of his master, Verdia. Were the elves facing something similar? Worry gnawed at him. He knew that sooner or later, it would be his turn to confront the looming war. While the village remained on high alert, Rigger exhausted his mana reserves by practicing earth magic, making it as dense and rigid as possible. He was confident he could already use a saint-level spell, but lacking a proper benchmark made it hard to gauge his current capabilities. He was about to cast another spell when his heightened hearing detected movement several hundred meters away, far from the tribe. Approaching stealthily, he saw Zen, the halfling rogue. He almost called out, but paused. What was Zen doing here? Without drawing attention, Rigger followed him through the forest, hiding in the shadows. When they reached a clearing, Rigger watched as Zen exchanged signals with hooded figures. He could clearly hear murmurs about the village and its weaknesses. Anger flared in his chest, and it took every ounce of self-control to keep him from leaping forward and tearing them apart. He knew that confronting Zen directly would be unwise. Instead, this information had to remain a secret. He waited for the right moment and then returned to the village, where he confided in Guys and the tribal leaders about what he had witnessed. Gustav immediately devised a plan to capture Zen and his allies by surprise, ensuring they remained unaware they'd been discovered. They decided to inform Fendrel as well, reasoning that if he had wanted to harm the tribe, he could have assassinated the leaders quietly and escaped. Fendrel was visibly shaken upon learning of Zen's betrayal. He assured Gustav that the treachery was isolated and reaffirmed the loyalty of Darien, whom he had known since childhood and trusted with his life, as well as Irina, his lover, who had as much to lose as the tribe's residents due to being an elf. Even so, It was decided that only Fendrel would be privy to Zen's betrayal. With the growing need for protection, Rigger decided to begin training the children he deemed most manu-attuned in magic. His physical and combat training had been progressing well, but he wasn't sure if everyone would excel in magic. To test his theory, he chose Killian, 5 years old, Lysena, 4 years old, and Taze, 7 years old, the 3 children with the greatest amount of mana and potential. If guided properly, they could become a significant asset to the tribe. Rigger started with simple instructions on beginner-level water magic, using this opportunity to test a theory he had recently developed about magic in general. If he was right, he was confident he could become a pioneering force in the magic of this new world. Hantar was hurled into the air, caught in the impact of a fiery explosion. Rigger emerged from the flames, his skin scorched, but his eyes fierce with determination. A roar echoed as he unleashed his howling magic in quick succession. Hantar was momentarily stunned mid-air before hitting the ground. When he regained his bearings, Rigger was already on top of him, his claws hovering mere centimeters from his jugular. The clearing was silent, broken only by their heavy breathing. Too fast. Hantar muttered. "Do you yield?" Rigger asked, his teeth clenched. Hantar let out a short laugh, filled with pride and surprise. "All right, boy. I yield." Rigger stepped back, releasing his father, and exhaled deeply, a victorious smile spreading across his face. His mother, Celine, clapped enthusiastically, while Fendrel whistled in approval. "You're really growing, Geru," his sword instructor remarked with a thoughtful gaze. "But remember, defeating your father once doesn't mean you've surpassed him." "He's right," Hantar added, standing with some difficulty. "But it was a good fight. I'd say, your best so far." Rigger nodded, trying to conceal the pride that burned within him. For a brief moment, he was not just a young apprentice, he was a true warrior. The shadow of night blanketed the forest canopy as Rigger and 3 other warriors moved silently under the faint glow of the moonlight. Rigger had his magic eye activated, scanning the surroundings for suspicious movement. Beside him, Geru led the formation with steady steps, while 2 other warriors held the rear. "These tracks are fresh," Geru said, crouching to inspect the ground. "Looks like they're trying to lure us somewhere." "Or maybe they're just fleeing," Rigger replied, though the unease in his voice was evident. A distant snap froze the group. It wasn't the natural sound of breaking branches, it was deliberate. "Spread out," Geru commanded in a low voice. The battle erupted suddenly, like thunder shattering the silence of the night. The intruders advanced swiftly, but Rigger was prepared. Using his magic eye, he immediately detected the movement patterns and positions of the enemies. Each step, every motion, was clear to him, as though a web of energy illuminated the battlefield. With a primal roar, he charged forward, already conjuring earthen spears that erupted from the ground toward the invaders. The stone's impact echoed through the forest, forcing the enemies to dodge. Rigger seized the moment, casting advanced fire magic, Flame Slice, with a swift motion of his hands. The flaming blade sliced through the air, striking one man diagonally and leaving a searing cut across his chest. The explosion of fire hurled him backward, screaming as the ground around him cracked from the force. But there was no time to revel in the success. For more enemies charged with renewed ferocity. Rigger surged ahead, his sharp claws gleaming in the moonlight. He grabbed the wrist of an enemy, an armored man, and with a fluid motion disarmed him. In a single turn, he twisted the man's arm and slammed him into the ground with a resounding thud. The enemy was left vulnerable and stunned. Without hesitation, Rigger pounced, sinking his claws into the man's throat. The move was swift and brutal, leaving no room for defense. He felt the life drain from the body beneath him, but his instincts didn't let him stop. The thrill of the hunt clouded his senses, driving him to be fiercer, deadlier. As he stood, another enemy lunged with a sharp blade aimed at his neck. Rigger ducked, letting the blade pass over his head, and retaliated with a powerful kick to the attacker's knee. The man stumbled forward, and Rigger leaped onto him, tearing him apart with his claws like a predator overpowering its prey. Nearby, the other warriors fought with equal intensity. One sliced through an enemy's neck with a clean sword strike, while Geru disarmed opponents with precise cuts, targeting vital points. But the enemies weren't simple foes, for more remained standing, and the battle was far from over. Rigger, now in a near-trance state, fought with savage precision. His strikes became faster, more instinctive. His mind blurred as his body moved on autopilot, driven purely by the need to dominate the battlefield. As another enemy tried to attack from behind, Rigger spun around, grabbing the man's shoulders and slashing his neck with his claws. Then it happened. One of the tribe's warriors, approaching to celebrate the victory, placed a hand on Rigger's shoulder. Reflexively, Rigger spun and delivered a violent kick to the warrior's chest. The impact hurled the man backward, slamming him into a tree with a dull thud. Rigger. Gera's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Rigger stopped abruptly, mere steps from his ally. Realization struck him like a lightning bolt, and his eyes widened in horror. His blood still roared in his veins, but something deep inside broke as he saw the damage he had inflicted. Rushing to the fallen warrior, who was struggling to rise, Rigger immediately cast healing magic, his hands trembling as the energy flowed into the injured man. The wounds closed, but the guilt in Rigger's heart remained raw. I'm so sorry, Rigger whispered, his voice thick with remorse. The warrior, still dazed, looked up at him with a mix of confusion and understanding. It's fine, he croaked. You were in combat mode. That wasn't you. Rigger swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. He glanced around, seeing the other warriors watching him with a mix of respect and wariness. The battle had been won, but Rigger had glimpsed a far greater conflict brewing within himself. The day was clear, but something in the air felt heavy. The Doldia village, always busy and welcoming, seemed different to Rigger. As he walked along the trails that cut through the huts, he felt the gazes. Many were still warm looks of recognition and admiration, but there were also cautious, even distrustful glances. Since the incident during the patrol, when his instincts overtook him and he attacked one of his allies, the respect he had earned began to crumble. Although the attack hadn't caused serious harm, the act itself was enough to plant doubts in the tribe's mind. He wasn't blaming them, though. He had always managed to stay in control, but lately, he wasn't as sure. He was more afraid of losing his rationality than they were. While his thoughts tormented him, he spotted guys in the distance, standing near one of the watchtowers. The chief of the warriors stared at him with a serious expression. When their gazes met, guys gestured for him to come over. Rigger approached without saying anything. Guys led him to a more secluded spot, where no one would overhear them. The silence between the two was heavy, and Guys finally broke it, his voice firm. Rigger, can we talk? Guys asked, bluntly. The young man nodded, feeling the weight of the words even before hearing them. Guys looked at him with a mix of respect and concern. I heard from Geru about your incident. This is not something to be taken lightly. I know. Rigger's voice was a whisper. It felt like I couldn't think, like my body was moving on its own. Guys sighed, crossing his arms. That's what worries me. You know, you remind me of someone. Do you know that? Rigger looked up, surprised. Who? My sister, Ghislaine. The name made Rigger frown. He had heard stories about Ghislaine de Doldia, but rarely did anyone speak of her directly. What does she have to do with me? Ghislaine was like you. Too strong, too wild. Since she was little, she was faster, more agile, and fiercer than any of us. Guys paused, looking at the horizon as if reliving old memories. She barely learned to speak the beast god language. She usually solved things with her fists. Always fighting, always challenging everyone around her. Then, when a wandering swordsman passed through here, she left with him. And you think I'm like her? Rigger asked, defensively. Not completely. You're different. You're intelligent, rational. You have the ability to learn and think beyond your instincts. But those same instincts are even stronger than hers, and your strength also far exceeds hers. Rigger felt a weight in his chest. Guy's words weren't said with anger, but with genuine concern. What does that mean? Rigger asked, with a mix of challenge and hesitation in his voice. It means that, as much as I see your potential, I have to be honest. Guys clenched his fists, his eyes showing reluctance. Ghislaine could be controlled. She wasn't as strong as you. Your potential becomes something dangerous instead of something good. What I mean is, no matter how many contributions you make to the tribe, if one day I believe that you are a threat to us, I will have to ask you to leave. The words hit Rigger like a blow. I don't want that. I don't wish for that. Guys hesitated, his voice heavy with regret. But as the next leader, I need to protect our tribe above all else. Rigger didn't answer. He remained silent as guys walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Rigger found an isolated spot near a stream, far from the village. He needed to think. Am I just a beast? He was reincarnated, and although he had realized his instincts early on, he always thought his rationality and adult maturity would prevail. But was that really the case? Is my place really here? These questions burned in his mind. He thought of his previous life, of who he was as a human. There, he had control. He had logic and reason. Here, however, it seemed like his instincts were always lurking, ready to take over. Am I a human reincarnated trying to live as a Doldia? Or am I a Doldia fighting against what I really am? These reflections led him to think of his mother. When Rigger got home, his mother immediately noticed something was wrong. She stopped what she was doing and walked over to him. Rigger, what happened? He hesitated but eventually told her everything. The looks from the tribe, the conversation with guys, and his own fears. Mom, what if I really am a danger? What if I end up like a beast? His mother cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look directly at her. Rigger, you are my son. No matter what happens, you will always be my son. But what if I can't control it? Then we'll work on it together. She smiled, a warm smile that seemed to chase away all the shadows. You're not alone, Rigger. You'll never be. Those words brought him some comfort. He knew he wouldn't resolve this problem so easily, but as Celine said, he had people who would help him. For the first time, it sparked curiosity in him. Why did he come to this world? Was it for a purpose? Was it by chance? He didn't know, and honestly, he wasn't sure if he wanted to find out. Later, Rigger joined his subordinates. He started calling them that because they asked him to, and they were increasingly acting like an organized group. As Rigger instilled discipline and knowledge during their training, they realized that they weren't living in easy times, and they adapted to this reality. His group was already 50 members strong, with 5 main leaders commanding 9 others. As for his magic apprentices, Killian, Lysena, and Taze, the training was becoming more serious, and results were starting to show. Killian, the most promising, could already cast magic without chanting, something that impressed Rigger. Lysena was also close to reaching that level, while Taze was still struggling with the basics. Good job, Killian, Rigger said, trying not to show favoritism. But remember, it's not just about power. Control is equally important. Okay, now can you teach me fire magic? Sure, I said I'd teach you once you master the chantless magic. But remember, fire is different from water, earth, and wind. You could hurt yourself if you get it wrong. As he trained the children, an idea began to form in his mind. The ideas about mana and magic he had theorized seemed to be correct. Mana reserves, for example, seemed to grow in childhood, contrary to what magicians believed. And from Killian's example, and soon Lysena's as well, chantless magic followed the same pattern. Even if only the most talented might learn it, it would still be a drastic change to the magical and combat systems in this world. If this knowledge was wrong, what else could be? He decided that he needed to experiment more, think outside the box. Perhaps the limitations of magic were more psychological than real. And if that was truly the case, he was confident in his creativity to create all kinds of magic. While he was reflecting on this, 2 little girls appeared, both around 3 years old. The one with cat ears, with her arrogant posture and nose in the air, approached with confidence. Are you Rigger? She asked, arms crossed. Yes. And who are you? I'm Linnea. And this here is Persina. She pointed to the other child, who had drooping dog ears and was absent-mindedly chewing a piece of meat. Rigger chuckled to himself. Well, what do I owe the pleasure? I'm Linnea Dedoldia, daughter of the future tribe chief, and I'm generously allowing you to teach us magic. Linnea said arrogantly, though her arms-crossed pose only made her look cute. Persina nodded her head, looking interested. I decided to give them a lesson now so they wouldn't get caught off guard by life in the future. At dusk, a secret meeting was called by the tribe's elders, including Gustav, Guys, and some of the main warriors. To his surprise, Rigger was invited to attend. In the cabin where they gathered, there was a rudimentary map of the region sketched on a table, with stones marking critical areas. Gustav, the tribe leader, began. We've received alarming information from the elves of the neighboring forests. Like us, they've been dealing with constant infiltrations by trafficker groups. These attacks are not random. They're testing us, looking for weaknesses. Rigger felt a chill down his spine hearing this. His mind immediately went to Verdia, his mentor, who was protecting their homeland. And what about ours? He asked. Until now, we've been able to maintain control. Gustav replied in a deep voice. But we know it's just a matter of time before they try something bigger. That's why we'll anticipate the attack. He pointed to the map, where a set of stones marked the tribe's borders. We'll make it look like we're gathering warriors to attack the trafficker bases just before the seasonal rains begin. However, that will only be a distraction. Guys completed the plan with a tense smile. Actually, we'll keep our best warriors hidden in the village. When the enemies come, thinking we're vulnerable, we'll wipe them all out in one fell swoop. There was a moment of silence as everyone processed the plan. It was risky, but it made sense. Rigger narrowed his eyes. Zen. Fendrel, the leader of the adventure group where Zen had infiltrated, nodded gravely. We know he's passing on information, so we'll use that to our advantage. He'll send false reports about our movements to lure the enemies into the trap. It was an intelligent plan, but Rigger knew that its success depended on everyone's execution. After the meeting, Rigger threw himself even deeper into his training. He began to learn the sword styles more seriously, thinking that relying only on his instincts could become even more dangerous. Dividing his time between the sword god style with Fendrel and the northern god style with Geru, he began to perceive the limits and advantages of each technique. While training with Fendrel, Rigger noticed something intriguing. In moments of high tension or concentration, he would unconsciously activate his battle aura, as if it were a natural reflex. However, trying to use it consciously was a completely different experience. The sensation was like trying to hold an uncontrollable flow of energy, something he couldn't direct or maintain for long. Even with all Fendrel's explanations and demonstrations, the process seemed almost like a puzzle. He didn't understand how his mentor could summon and control the aura with such precision, as if it were an extension of his own will. I'm still far off, Rigger thought, clenching his fists, determined to overcome this challenge. What would be possible if I combined the speed of the sword god with the unpredictability of the northern god? The idea of creating his own style wasn't new, but now it seemed more tangible. He realized that magic was heavily constrained by stigmas, and sword styles might be the same. After all, he knew that in his previous world, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of different martial arts. He knew he would have to learn everything he could before embarking on this path. Additionally, in his practice with magic, he experimented by combining earth and fire magic. The idea of creating lava had seemed absurd at first, but he managed some small successes. Magic is more flexible than we think. Maybe it's possible to completely rewrite what we know about it. These experiments filled him with determination. He was starting to see his strength not just as a weapon, but as a tool for change. With the young apprentices, Rigger became even firmer. He knew that to protect them, he had to instill discipline and responsibility in them. He had called Irina, the archer from the group, to teach the basics of archery to the children who were interested. Considering the difficult times ahead, she was happy to help. No matter how talented you are, without discipline, talent is nothing. He would often repeat. Killian, who had already mastered silent magic, received special attention. This is just the beginning. Don't slack off in your sword training. Physical combat is just as, if not more important than magic. Losing control of magic can be more dangerous than failing to cast it. Lysena, who was close to reaching this level, was showing signs of frustration. Don't compare yourself to others. Everyone has their own pace, Rigger advised, though he knew his words sounded empty to a child. Taze, on the other hand, was the most challenging. Though he worked hard, he clearly struggled with the fundamentals. I can't do it, he exclaimed during a training session. Rigger approached him. Don't say that. I can see with my own eyes that your mana is getting more familiar with the process. At this point, he was almost sure that the younger the student, the easier it was to teach them magic. In addition to the three, Linnea and Persina, his new students began to approach more. Linnea, though only 3 years old, exhibited a striking arrogance. I'm Linnea de Doldia, heir to the chief. I don't need lessons. Rigger laughed. Heir or not, everyone starts somewhere. And with that attitude, it looks like you didn't learn your lesson last time. He said, as balls of mud began to form in his hands while he walked toward her. Aha-Persina, with her piece of meat always in hand, was quieter but watched everything with interest. I train after I eat, she stated before taking another bite. The two were different challenges, but Rigger knew he needed to integrate them into the group. They would be important in the future, of that he was certain. As the days passed, the tension in the village increased. The warriors were restless, and the news from the elves kept everyone on high alert. Rigger, for his part, did his best to prepare. Between training, magic experiments, and reflections on who he was, he knew the confrontation was approaching. And when the time came, he would be ready. Current status: Fire Magic, Advanced Earth Magic, Advanced Water Magic, Intermediate Wind Magic, Intermediate Healing Magic, Intermediate Detoxification Magic, Beginner Howling Magic, Minor Mastery Merged Spells, Lava Ball, Mud Field, Mud Trap, Northern God Style, Intermediate Sword God Style, Intermediate Combat with Natural Weapons, Claws, Instincts, etc. Advanced Intellectual Skills, Reading and Writing in Beast God Language and Human Language Mathematics, University Level Practical. Skills: Excellent Hunter, Good Teacher, Horrible Cook. POV Killian Dodoldia. The rainy season was approaching. My nose itched, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth mixed with the fragrance of trees. Whenever that smell came, it meant the storm was near. It was familiar, but today it felt different, heavier, almost suffocating. While practicing fire magic, a flame dancing in my hand, I glanced at Rigger. He was sitting near the edge of the clearing, as sharp as ever, carefully adjusting his sword. I'd seen him do this before, but today, it felt like he was elsewhere. His eyes gleamed with determination, but there was something more, concern perhaps? Rigger was never like us. From the day I saw him leaping through the trees at just 2 years old, he already seemed different. Not just because he was astonishingly strong and talented. He was more. Not in size, but in what he represented. He always knew what to do, always had a plan, even when everyone else was confused. When he stood, everyone stopped to watch. I remember the day he started training us. I had just turned 4, barely knowing anything about life. That towering figure became my teacher. I would have called him master, but he firmly forbade it. From that moment, I followed him wherever he went, except during his own training. When he wasn't around, we trained and played together, our group roaming the village under Rigger's banner. No other group of kids dared to challenge us, and we eventually absorbed any rivals into our own circle. Even with this new, larger group, Rigger always remained impartial and fair, resolving every problem and complaint with ease. My respect and admiration for him grew each day. Then came the day when Rigger was officially recognized as a warrior of the tribe, not just for his power but also for his intellect and maturity. I heard he had defeated his father, one of the strongest warriors in the village. That day, we celebrated as if the achievement was our own. Despite his new responsibilities, he never abandoned us, not that anyone expected him to. He could do it all, and he never made mistakes. I think it was on that day that I realized my goal. I was learning magic, and my parents and friends already found that impressive enough. But what Rigger was teaching me was a unique skill, one that I might never fully master. You can do it, Killian. Just guide your mana naturally, Rigger said, pointing at my chest and then my hand. Let it flow like a river. Don't try to control it all at once. And it worked. For the first time, I created a ball of water, small and fragile, without using any incantation. He smiled, and in that moment, I knew I wanted to follow him. I felt that this was my path, my destiny. As long as I followed him, everything would be fine. Since then, Rigger has become like a demigod in my eyes. Lysena, Taze, and I, along with the other division leaders, always looked to him for direction. And he always gave it. Even when things seemed grim, he found a way forward. Today, as I watch him, I realize he has changed. There's something heavier about him, more serious. The responsibility he carries is immense. Yet, even so, he doesn't falter. As I observed him, Lysena approached. Killian, what are you looking at? She asked, her voice curious, a faint smile on her face. Rigger, I replied, my voice quieter than I expected. Are you worried about him? I thought for a moment before answering. No. I want to help him in any way I can. Lysena fell silent, but I could tell she felt the same way. We weren't just his students. Rigor was our leader. That day, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened, I would stand by him. Because deep down, I knew he was more than just a boy. He was Rigor. And Rigor would make a difference. MC's POV, the room was quiet, save for the sound of blades being sharpened and the occasional crackle of the firewood in the hearth. Fendrel stood against the log wall of the cabin, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me. Irina sat beside him. Darian stood on the other side, spinning a knife between his fingers, his relaxed demeanor contrasting with the tension in the air. The two were inseparable, childhood friends. Whenever they spoke of each other, there was a camaraderie I envied. They seemed so synchronized, so human. Beyond them, the rest of the adventurers were scattered around the tent. Fendrel spoke first, breaking the silence. So Rigor, you're saying Guise is leading a direct assault on the enemy bases before the rainy season hits? Yes, I replied firmly. We'll need your help again to defend the tribe, alongside the warriors stationed here, of course. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Zen's mouth twitch slightly as he heard me. Fendrel narrowed his eyes, studying me. He was quite the actor, even I almost believed his facade. It was a bold, risky plan, but it had a high chance of success if executed well. Darian chuckled, his tone light but tinged with admiration. You've got guts, no doubt about it. But, Fendrel, do you think they'll fall for it? These slavers aren't amateurs. It's a risk, I admitted, keeping my voice steady. But a calculated one. They might still hesitate to attack because of the presence of a sword saint. Fendrel walked to the table in the center of the room, placing his hands on it and leaning forward. He seemed to weigh every detail, glancing at his companions to gauge their thoughts. Finally, he sighed and nodded. All right. We'll do it. We'll do our best to protect the tribe in their absence. I nodded, swallowing the tension rising in my chest. I followed him silently, keeping myself hidden among the trees. Zen was careful, but not careful enough to lose me. He walked quickly, his eyes scanning the ground ahead as if afraid of being followed. And rightly so, I thought. My breathing was steady, my footsteps light. It was dark, but my eyes adjusted easily to the dim light, a gift of my race. Still, I knew that if Zen turned at the wrong moment, he might see me. He paused for a moment, tilting his head slightly. I crouched low, pressing my body to the ground, and held my breath. He glanced around, suspicious, but soon continued on his way. He left what appeared to be a letter inside a hollow log before moving on. When I was sure he was far enough away, I headed back to the village. When I arrived, I gathered Killian, Lysena, and Taze, along with Erat and Leone, the other two division commanders. They were waiting, their faces a mix of excitement and fear. Listen, I began, my voice firm. You cannot reveal yourselves, no matter what happens. Stay hidden until I give the signal. And if something goes wrong. We run to the forest, Killian finished, his eyes shining with determination. I nodded. Exactly. Protect the other children. And don't look back. No matter what you hear, don't stop. They nodded in unison, and I felt an immense weight settle on me. Before leaving, I went to my mother. She was organizing items in the cabin, likely trying to keep herself occupied. Mom, I called, and she turned to me, her face weary. Don't worry about me. Just stay safe. She hesitated, her eyes filling with concern. But finally, she nodded and pulled me into a hug. Her warmth gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed. Hontar, Guise, Geru, and several other warriors stood in a tense circle, their expressions grim. Gustav repeated the plan, detailing every movement with precision. Zen has delivered the false information. This should give us the advantage we need. When the battle begins, Rigor will launch a large-scale ice attack to destabilize them. I need all of you ready to strike as soon as their formation breaks. What about the enemy's strongest warriors? Any new information? Hontar asked, his concern evident. Gustav took a deep breath. They're the biggest threat. We know Fendrel is here, but the slavers don't seem to fear him. That means they have something or someone they believe can counter him. Guys clenched his fists. If they have a saint-level warrior. We can handle it, Gustav interrupted. Our losses might be greater, but no single man can stand against an army of warriors alone. I watched the discussion, conflicted. What if I lost control? It had happened before, and the fear of it haunted me. But I couldn't fail, not now. Days passed. The warriors had departed on an expedition to eliminate the slavers. To make the ruse convincing, none of the families had been informed. The farewells were somber and heart-wrenching. I was now secretly standing guard at the edge of the tribe's territory, keeping my magic eye active and scanning for any movement in the distance. Suddenly, I spotted dozens of mana signatures approaching. I quickly sent a signal to alert everyone to prepare. Moments later, I sensed a presence. Fendrel emerged from the main trail, followed by Darien and several other warriors from the tribe. They were armed and ready for battle, but something felt off about Darien. He seemed uneasy. The rest of our group will launch an ambush on their rear, Darien said, his voice laced with confidence and a faint smirk. Fendrel nodded, his gaze sharp as it locked onto mine through the underbrush. I returned the gesture, signaling that we were ready. The moment the enemy entered the clearing, we would begin our attack. We're under attack. Gather all warriors now. Fendrel shouted, his voice commanding. The guards sprang into action, preparing for the assault. Despite everything going according to plan, my instinct screamed that something was wrong. The invaders advanced through the forest, torches and swords in hand, setting fires wherever they passed. They were well organized, their threatening silhouettes cutting through the forming mist. Dozens of them marched, but my attention was drawn to the central group, 5 swordsmen who walked with absolute confidence. They were different. Their posture, their aura, it all screamed lethality. Dressed in dark clothing accented with silver, each carried a longsword. They moved like shadows, their grace unnerving. Now wasn't the time to dwell on their strength. I gathered all the mana I could, feeling it surge and vibrate through my veins. The ground beneath me began to freeze, a thin layer of ice spreading outward as the air around me grew frigid. Taking a deep breath, I bent my knees and leaped into the air with all my might. Time seemed to slow as I soared upward. Below, the slavers turned their heads, confused, watching the shadow streak across the sky. "What is that?" someone shouted in alarm. At the apex of my jump, I raised my hand above my head, channeling all the mana I could muster into a single spell. A brilliant blue orb formed, pulsating with freezing energy and casting an eerie light across the shadowed forest. Freezing Nova. I roared, my voice reverberating with power. It wasn't the actual spell, I hadn't learned it yet, but it seemed close enough to what it would be. The orb detonated as it hit the ground, unleashing a blinding explosion of ice. A wave of frost radiated outward, shards of ice raining down like spears, impaling the ground and catching unprepared enemies. The temperature plummeted instantly, and a swirling blizzard enveloped the battlefield, leaving a pristine, cutting whiteness in its wake. When I landed, the impact cracked the frozen ground beneath me, sending out another shockwave of frost. Trees creaked and shattered, transformed into crystalline sculptures of ice. Many slavers screamed, trying to flee, but the cold claimed them before they could escape. A significant portion of the enemy was caught in the storm, frozen in place with their terrified expressions preserved in ice. As expected, the 5 swordsmen dodged the attack effortlessly, retreating before it struck. One of them stepped forward, the leader, by his demeanor. He unsheathed his blade, a crooked smile playing on his face, though his eyes were calculating. I glared at them, unflinching, while the guards began their counterattack against the invading forces. The sounds of clashing steel and roaring voices filled the clearing. Fendrel and Darien approached me. "What do we know about them?" I asked without taking my eyes off the 5 figures. "They're known as the Black Frost 5, Fendrel said grimly. "Infamous mercenaries in the underworld. They've never failed a job, but they're only advanced-level swordsmen." I swallowed hard. Black Frost. The name felt like a cruel irony, given my reliance on ice magic. The apparent leader stepped forward. He had long brown hair and a jagged scar running diagonally across his face, making him appear almost grotesque. His voice was clear and sharp as he addressed Fendrel. "Fendrel. It's been a while." Fendrel narrowed his eyes but remained calm. Resorting to working with slavers now? I'm not impressed. The swordsman chuckled. We do what's necessary. And you? Come to die alongside these furballs. I was prepared for their provocations. It was a common tactic in the North God style. But my instincts screamed louder than ever. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. I scanned the battlefield, using every sense at my disposal. The fights around me were chaotic, but didn't justify the danger I felt. It wasn't these five. Their strength alone wouldn't provoke such a reaction. Deciding not to take chances, I signaled the hidden warriors to attack prematurely. Just as I felt a fleeting sense of safety, it happened. The enemy leader charged at Fendrel, wielding what I recognized as a longsword of silence. The choice seemed absurd, given his opponent. Fendrel appeared wary, his eyes darting to the other four swordsmen. He activated his ultimate technique, the longsword of light. Seeking a swift death? I'll oblige, he said coldly. But before I could react, Darien moved. He was behind Fendrel in an instant, his blade slicing through the air toward his childhood friend's back. Fendrel, behind you! I shouted, acting on instinct. My warning came just in time. Fendrel deflected the strike and twisted his body, narrowly avoiding being cleaved in half. However, Darien's blade continued, severing Fendrel's dominant arm and slicing off his right ear. Blood sprayed across the snow as Fendrel stumbled back, clutching the bleeding stump where his arm had been. Darien! Fendrel gasped, disbelief etched across his face. Darien showed no remorse. His expression was cold, his eyes devoid of emotion. I'm sorry, old friend, but the world is cruel. Rage erupted within me, wild and unrelenting. Before I knew it, I was hurtling toward Darien, moving faster than I ever had. You'll pay for this. I roared, my voice raw with fury. The mercenary leader smirked as he watched the chaos unfold. Looks like the real show has begun. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the humid air of the forest. Darien faced rigor, raising his sword. His eyes, once brimming with the confidence of an experienced warrior, now faltered under the predatory stance of the young Doldia. Rigor moved forward, low and fluid like a predator stalking its prey. He feinted a strike with his sword to Darien's left, aiming for the mercenary's abdomen, but at the last moment, he twisted his torso and slashed toward Darien's neck. Darien's blade rose to block, its steel glinting under the sunlight filtering through the trees. The clash rang out in the clearing, but the strike was a decoy. In the same motion, Rigor planted his foot and spun, releasing his sword in midair in a North God-style technique, and delivered a devastating kick to Darien's stomach. The mercenary leader was hurled backward like a stone, flying several meters before crashing against a tree. The wood groaned, and Darien collapsed to his knees, coughing and clutching his abdomen. Rigor caught his sword as it fell, his gaze fixed on his target. Before he could strike again, a commanding voice broke through the tension. Rigor, don't advance alone. Fendrel, wounded, clutched his severed arm while shouting with effort. His voice stirred something within Rigor, briefly pulling him back to rationality. Rigor blinked, the world around him realigning. Quickly, he reached Fendrel's side and cast healing magic to stop the bleeding. He lamented his lack of advanced healing magic, which could have reattached the arm if the wound were fresh. He tried pushing the limits of intermediate healing magic, but to no avail. While Rigor paused to regain focus, Darien staggered to his feet, still clutching his pained stomach. You're as impressive as ever, Rigor, Darien spat, a mocking smile on his lips. Why, Darien? Is there a good reason for this? Are they threatening the rest of our group? Fendrel asked, hope evident in his voice. The rest of the group is safe, secured somewhere, Darien replied. I don't have time for a melodramatic explanation. We're short on time, after all. Before Fendrel could respond, the remaining 5 Black Frost mercenaries began to encircle him and Rigor. But if you need a summary, Darien continued, it's about always living in your shadow, being weaker, slower, less talented. When we formed our adventure group, you were the undeniable leader. When the woman of my dreams joined, she chose you. Call me crazy or whatever you want, but this job pays more than we've earned in all our adventures combined. Enough for me to live in peace with Irina and the others in the north. Without you. But don't worry, our friendship was real. I'll make sure they know you died a hero. His tone was cold, but the emotion in his eyes betrayed him. Fendrel crumbled, his last hope crushed mercilessly. "How touching," one mercenary sneered, sharpening his blade against his hand. "Let's wrap this up, kid." The sound of snapping branches and rustling leaves filled the air. One by one, the Dodoldia warriors emerged from the shadows. Guys led the charge, sword in hand and a deathly glint in his eyes. "Rats like you should never have entered this forest," Guys said, his voice low and menacing. Hantar appeared beside him, his fists clenched and his claws already stained with the blood of earlier battles. More Dodoldia warriors emerged, surrounding the mercenaries with deadly precision. "Why didn't they attack our bases? Isn't that what Zen told us?" one mercenary muttered, his gaze darting nervously. "Something went wrong." Another replied, but before they could act, Guys raised his sword and shouted, "Advance!" The battlefield erupted into chaos. Guys charged first, targeting two mercenaries with surprising speed. He swung his sword in a horizontal arc, forcing them to retreat. Before they could recover, he roared, releasing a howling magic that stunned them. Seizing the opening, he struck diagonally, his blade slicing through one mercenary from shoulder to chest. Across the clearing, Hantar fought with raw power and precision. He punched a mercenary in the face, breaking his nose with a single blow. When another tried to attack from behind, Hantar spun, grabbing the man's arm and snapping it before slamming him into the ground with his claws. In the center of the battle, Rigger regained his confidence. Leaving the unconscious Fendrel in a safe spot, he rejoined the fray. He moved like a blur, using earth magic to create small protrusions under his enemy's feet, throwing them off balance before striking. One mercenary tripped and fell, and Rigger pounced, driving his sword into the man's throat in a diagonal slash that spilled blood onto the forest floor. Another enemy, wielding two daggers dripping with poison, approached. Rigger backed off, watching the man's swift movements. Using wind magic to boost his speed, he dodged an attack, spinning to the enemy's back. With a sharp movement, he whispered a spell, Wind Blade. The magical slash tore through the mercenary's body, leaving him screaming on the ground. Despite the Dodoldia warriors' advantage, the Black Frost mercenaries were no ordinary foes. Two of them, masters of the North God style, fought side by side. Their blades moved in swift, precise arcs, cutting down Dodoldia warriors as they advanced. One of them targeted Guys, who blocked the strikes but was slowly pushed back by their relentless assault. "Rigger with me," Guys called out as he fended off a series of rapid attacks. Rigger noticed the mercenary pressing Guys, his blade moving with practiced precision. Guys was forced to retreat step by step, and the mercenary, confident, surged forward for a decisive overhead strike. Without hesitation, Rigger charged to assist. He conjured earthen spikes beneath the enemy's feet, forcing him to leap to avoid the attack. The brief pause gave Guys enough time to recover his stance and strike, but the mercenary easily blocked it, spinning to deliver a quick blow to Rigger's side as he closed the distance. The impact was weaker than expected, as Rigger caught the strike with sheer force. He countered with a kick to the enemy's knee, causing him to stagger and creating an opening for Guys to unleash his howling magic. The spell hit directly, disorienting the mercenary, who clutched his ears as the deafening sound reverberated. Also stunned, but already accustomed to the magic's effects, Rigger seized the moment of vulnerability and dealt the final blow. He leapt forward, his blade slicing cleanly through the mercenary's neck. The opponent collapsed to the ground, his sword clattering against the stones. As the remaining mercenaries struggled to hold their ground, one of them, scanning the battlefield, realized what was happening. They knew everything. "We were deceived," he shouted, eyes wide as he looked at Darien. But Darien was as bewildered as the rest. Even so, he raised his sword and snarled, "It doesn't matter. Keep fighting. Fendrel is injured. We can still turn this around." Despite his words, the tide of battle had shifted in the Doldia's favor. Every move reminded the intruders that the forest was their home, while the mercenaries were unwelcome invaders. One by one, the enemies fell to claws, swords, and magic. Soon, another of the Black Frost Five was slain, Lonar, the guard captain, driving his blade into the man's chest. Darien and the remaining three mercenaries began retreating, their bodies covered in cuts and bloodstains. However, as they fled, one of them left an opening, which Lonar confidently exploited. But it was a feint. As his blade was about to strike, a hidden dagger flew, embedding itself in Lonar's eye. Rigger watched in horror as his ally fell, the knife lodged in his skull, his eyes glazing over in pain. Something primal stirred within Rigger. The growl that escaped his throat was deep and feral. His eyes locked onto the fleeing enemies, and his fists clenched until his nails drew blood. He no longer thought. Rage clouded his mind. He could only feel. Do not pursue. We've already taken down most of them. This is our victory. Guys declared. The hurried footsteps of the fleeing mercenaries echoed through the clearing, snapping branches and crushing dry leaves. Lonar's body lay motionless on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Rigger dropped his sword and knelt beside his fallen friend, already knowing it was too late. Lonar. He whispered, his voice heavy with pain and anger. A Doldia warrior placed a hand on his shoulder. Rigger but he didn't hear. A deep roar tore from his throat as he sprang to his feet, his gaze fixed on the retreating mercenaries. His beast instincts took over, and his mind was consumed by a single thought: hunt. He sprinted into the forest, his senses heightened by his fury. Every heartbeat of the enemies ahead drummed in his ears, calling him to battle. His magical eyes pulsed, capturing every movement, every labored breath from his prey. Rigger extended his hand, summoning earth magic. The ground beneath one mercenary surged upward, forming a pillar that slammed him into a tree. The impact was brutal, and before the man could recover, Rigger was upon him. Without hesitation, Rigger drove his claws into the man's chest, tearing through light armor. With a feral motion, he ripped upward, rending flesh and metal. The mercenary crumpled, gasping, until a final slash across his throat ended him. Farther ahead, another mercenary turned to face him. This one wielded a longsword with refined technique, likely trained in the North God style. He advanced, delivering swift, precise thrusts, but Rigger dodged each strike with instinctive movements. The mercenary attempted a horizontal slash, but Rigger deftly closed the distance, twisting his arm and slamming him into the ground. Rigger grabbed his neck. "You're not escaping." With sheer brute strength, he snapped the man's neck like a twig. By then, the Doldia warriors had caught up to him. Guys roared, unleashing his howling magic, sending shockwaves through the forest. The remaining mercenaries staggered, disoriented by the impact. But Rigger felt the shockwave too, though to a lesser degree. His body tensed, and his mind, already frayed by the frenzy, betrayed him. He turned toward Guys, his glowing eyes filled with unbridled rage. All he registered was the pain caused by the magic, and Guys became a target. Before anyone could react, Rigger lunged at his ally. He struck with his claws. Guys dodged instinctively but still suffered a deep slash to his neck, narrowly avoiding a fatal wound. Another warrior tried to intervene, but Rigger spun, elbowing him into a tree with bone-cracking force. "Rigger, control yourself," shouted Hantar, his father, stepping between his son and the other warriors. Rigger growled low, advancing with claws raised. Hantar didn't back down. When the strike came, he sidestepped, but not enough to avoid it entirely. Rigger's claws tore into his left arm, blood dripping down the older warrior's forearm. The sight of his father's blood momentarily froze Rigger. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and his eyes flickered between fury and shock. "You're not an animal. Control yourself, Rigger," Hantar said firmly, his voice steady despite the pain. Sanity flickered back into Rigger's mind, albeit briefly. He stepped back, staring at his blood-stained claws and the wound on Hunter's arm. The sound of the fleeing mercenaries, however, pulled his attention again. He was not in control. His rationality teetered on the edge. He was afraid he might kill someone if he stayed. "I'm in control now," he told himself, but hadn't he said the same before? "Don't follow me." Before anyone could stop him, Rigger darted into the forest, chasing after the enemies alone. The remaining mercenaries had regrouped, with Darien leading them. They chose a clearing surrounded by dense trees, a favorable spot for an ambush. "He's coming," Darien said, gripping his sword tightly. "Are you sure this is a good idea? 2 of us are already dead," one of the Black Frost 5 whispered. "He's seen your faces. He's 6 years old now and already a monster. What happens in 10 years? Do you want to live the rest of your life waiting for him to come for your head?" Darien retorted. "How do you know he'll come alone?" another asked. "The kid's been half-crazed lately, but it's just a chance. If he brings others, We'll continue retreating." Rigor emerged, running into view, his breathing heavy and his gaze fixed on the group. The three mercenaries took their positions, while others hidden in the trees waited for the right moment to strike. "Finally alone, are you?" Darien taunted. "Did you finish off your friends back there?" Rigor's instinct screamed that something was wrong. He tried to stop, but it was too late. Arrows rained down from above. He used wind magic to deflect most, but one grazed his shoulder, and another embedded itself in his leg. He roared, snapping the arrow shaft before charging forward again. Darien advanced with two allies. One of them, a swordsman skilled in both the North God and Water God styles, unleashed swift, fluid strikes. Rigor dodged as best he could but was struck on the flank by a shallow cut. Reacting quickly, he used earth magic to conjure a column of stone, forcing his opponent to back off. However, another mercenary attacked from the side, leaving Rigor surrounded on all fronts. His eyes sharpened like a predator's, his ears catching even the faintest sounds. The battle dragged on. Rigor possessed extraordinary vitality, but even he was beginning to feel exhaustion setting in. Sensing danger behind him, he spun around just in time, his heightened senses alerting him to an incoming strike. He cast his howling magic to gain a brief respite, but the mercenaries were prepared. Covering their ears, they pressed forward, and a diagonal sword slash tore across his back, leaving a searing pain that clouded his mind. Driven by pure survival instinct, Rigor retaliated with a sonic blast to his right, using the recoil to launch himself in the opposite direction. He collided with one of the mercenaries, the impact leaving him disoriented. He knew he was at a severe disadvantage. His body moving on sheer willpower as he desperately sought an opening. Rolling to the side, he contemplated using large-scale magic, but his dwindling mana made the idea impossible. He felt his reserves nearing depletion, forcing him to conserve what little he had left. Rigor stumbled, his body battered and covered in cuts and bruises. The taste of iron filled his mouth, and blood trickled down the side of his face. Breathing heavily, he remained defiant, his eyes blazing with both fury and determination. The three remaining mercenaries surrounded him with calculated precision. Darien stood at the front, his sword poised, while the other two flanked Rigor with deliberate steps. "Still standing? Impressive," Darien sneered. "Now that I think about it, wasn't your elven master's name Verdia? Verdia Solarion? If you survive, you might find an unpleasant surprise waiting for you." His cold smile cut deeper than any blade. Taking it as a provocation, Rigor flexed his knees, shifting into a defensive stance. He used water magic to clear the blood obscuring his left eye and activated his magic eye to track their subtle movements. One of the mercenaries made the first move, lunging with the longsword of silence, a sword god technique. Rigor countered with earth magic, creating a slight elevation beneath the enemy's feet, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, Rigor lunged and slashed diagonally with his claws, carving deep into the man's shoulder. The second mercenary wasted no time, launching a concealed North God attack from behind. The strike was devastating, but Rigor managed to raise a stone wall just in time. The force shattered the barrier, throwing him backward. Rigor collided with the trunk of a tree, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Before he could recover, Darien advanced, his blade gleaming with lethal intent. Rigor felt the cold grip of death as he sensed no escape. In desperation, he unleashed Fire Explosion, an advanced fire spell, at point-blank range. The flames engulfed Darien, but the sheer force also sent Rigor hurtling backward. The forest clearing was illuminated by the explosion, and the shockwaves scattered the other mercenaries. Rigor landed hard, rolling across the ground, his body now covered in severe burns. Smoke curled from his charred skin as he rose, his monstrous physique the only thing keeping him standing. Darien emerged from the flames, limping and bleeding from multiple wounds. His leather armor was scorched, and half his body and face were burned beyond recognition, but he refused to fall. "You're a monster, kid," he rasped. Grinding his teeth, Rigor invoked mud magic, turning the ground beneath his enemies into a quagmire. The unstable footing caused two of them to lose their balance. Using wind magic to propel himself forward, Rigor targeted the swordsman blending the sword god and water god styles. With a precise strike, he tore the man's throat open before he could recover from the mud. The body fell with a dull thud. Rigor turned to the next enemy, who had already escaped the quagmire. This mercenary employed advanced North God techniques, delivering a series of rapid, heavy strikes. Rigger dodged as best he could, but one slash caught his shoulder, cutting deep. Ignoring the pain, Rigger executed a risky grappling maneuver, slipping inside the mercenary's guard. He locked the man's neck in a leg hold while grabbing his sword hand with raw strength. With one sharp motion, Rigger finished him with a lethal claw to the throat. Now only Darien remained. Both combatants were bloody, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse. Darien, unable to escape, leaned on his sword for support. He smirked. "My team's at the training grounds, 500 meters that way," he said, pointing in a specific direction. Rigger stood silent, his breaths ragged as rage consumed his thoughts. "I thought I'd fail to kill Fendrel, and he'd end me, but I never imagined dying at your hands," Darien muttered, gazing at the overcast sky. Rigger advanced, picking up a fallen sword from the ground. "I wasn't lying about your master," Darien continued, his voice faltering. "The leader of our group, the North Saint Kalinowski, was sent with a secondary mission to capture elven slaves. But his primary mission is to assassinate Verdia Solarion. Seems your master upset the wrong people." "Is that true?" Rigger growled. Darien coughed violently, blood staining his lips. "Yes. They're probably arriving as we speak. If you leave now, you might already be too late. But hey, tell Fendrel I'm sorry, will you?" Rigger said nothing, staring at Darien as he knelt in defeat. Lifting the sword, he brought it down, severing the man's head in one clean motion. With his mana almost depleted, Rigger used what little he had left to heal his most severe wounds. He headed to the location Darien had mentioned, freeing his captured allies. Healing Marla, the healer, he gave her instructions. "Tell my parents, I'm heading to the Elven village. A North Saint is targeting Verdia. Protect our home. I'll return." Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared into the forest. He paused briefly, blood dripping from his hands, his mind still burning with the heat of battle. Darien's words echoed like a relentless drumbeat in his head. Looking back in the direction of his tribe, he hesitated. The fear of harming those he loved gnawed at him. He left his message and moved forward without hesitation, running through the dense woods. His silhouette faded into the night as his mind focused on one goal: saving Verdia. POV Verdia Solarion. The hot wind swept through the devastated field, carrying the scent of scorched earth and dry leaves from what was once a vibrant, energetic clearing. Now, everything around her was a desolate landscape, reduced to a circle of destruction. The battle, which had raged on for over half a day, had taken its toll. The hurricane spell, a saint-level incantation, had been enough to scatter most of the remaining invaders, smugglers and mercenaries who dared attack the elven village. However, it came at the cost of nearly all of Verdia's remaining mana. Leaning heavily on her staff, her arms trembled, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. The fatigue pulsed through her body, a stark reminder of her limitations. Despite her vast experience and power as a king-ranked mage, she was not invincible. Her body still had the vitality and resilience of her youthful elven years, but mana exhaustion was not something that willpower alone could overcome. "That was impressive," a voice broke through the heavy silence, calm yet laced with menace. Verdia lifted her gaze. About 20 meters away, an old man who looked to be in his 70s or 80s walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. To the untrained eye, he appeared unremarkable. White hair, a deeply wrinkled face, a neatly trimmed beard, and plain clothes devoid of ornamentation. Only the short sword at his side hinted at the danger he posed. "It's over," the man declared, stopping at the edge of the ruined area. His gaze weighed on her like a blade. "At this distance, killing you is as easy as slaughtering a rabbit. It doesn't matter if you're a saint-level, king-level, or even emperor-level mage. All you mages are the same, fragile." Verdia tried to gather the strength to raise her staff, but she knew it would be futile. This man was no mere mercenary. From what little she could sense, he was at least at saint rank, more than capable of dispatching a mage before they could even begin a chant. Drawing on her experience, she quickly pieced together the truth. This man wasn't here by chance. "Who sent you after me?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. She needed time. Time to think, time to understand. At the very least, she wanted to die knowing why. The old man smiled, a thin, cold expression. "An important noble from Meles," he said. 50 years ago, You and your band of adventurers killed his parents. Do you remember? Oh, of course you don't. You long-lived races always forget the people you crush along the way. But he remembers. He was just a child when you left him alive, a mistake that, in the end, became your undoing. Verdia felt a pang of recognition. During her adventuring days half a century ago, she had fought countless battles, humans, monsters, other adventurers. The world was cruel, and mercy often came at a cost. She and her party had made decisions they believed were just at the time, but they had never considered the long-term consequences. 50 years. She murmured, more to herself than to him. And here I am, the instrument of vengeance, he continued, drawing his sword with deliberate slowness. The metallic ring of the blade echoed ominously. Let me introduce myself. I am Kalinowski Jerk, Saint of the North. You've lived for centuries, haven't you? You've probably gathered countless tales, achieved countless feats. But all of that ends here, at the hands of a man who wasn't even born when you were out conquering the world. Verdia closed her eyes for a moment, acknowledging the cruel irony. She had lived so long, seen so much, yet her journey would end here, at the hands of a human who, compared to the challenges she had faced, should have been insignificant. Her mind began to wander, revisiting the centuries of her life. She had been so young when she first ventured into the world, a talented but impulsive mage. Her adventuring companions, people who had become her family, were long gone now, claimed by time, violence, or both. After losing so many loved ones, she had closed herself off from the world. She became a distant observer, devoting herself to studying and preserving knowledge rather than forming new bonds. Why bother, when everyone she cared for would eventually die? But then there was that boy. Little Rigger. At first, she had only intended to ensure he was healthy and then leave. But something about the child had captivated her. His insatiable curiosity about the world, his unyielding desire to learn, and his startling talent were all remarkable. But those were secondary. What truly drew her to him was his perspective, his questions. When she and his mother told him stories, he asked things no one else would. Why does magic work? Where did it come from? If so many races are enslaved, why hasn't anyone tried to abolish slavery? If divine-level warriors are so strong, why don't they overthrow the Azuran nobility if they're so corrupt? Has anyone ever tried to tame monsters? It wasn't just curiosity. Rigger's questions were challenges, seeds of rebellion against the world's status quo. He didn't just seek answers, he sought change. Through the years spent with him, Verdia realized Rigger was a force of nature, a storm in the making. But more than that, he had accomplished something she had thought impossible. He had made her care again. She remembered the sparkle in his eyes whenever he learned something new. The way he turned stories into bold ideas for the future. He wasn't content to listen. He wanted to create something of his own. This boy will be the start of something extraordinary. But now, with Kalinowski closing in, Verdia doubted she would live to see Rigger reach his potential. Regret washed over her as she thought about how much more she could have taught and guided him. Kalinowski advanced, sword raised for the final blow. Verdia had no strength left to resist, no mana to defend herself. All she could do was close her eyes and wait for the inevitable. But the strike never came. A roar of fire split the air, a torrent of flames forcing Kalinowski to leap aside with remarkable speed. The heat of the flames scorched the air around Verdia, but she didn't care. "Master, are you all right?" Rigger's voice was deep, but carried a genuine note of concern. Verdia opened her eyes to see the young boy standing between her and the Saint of the North, his figure outlined by the glowing embers of the flames he had conjured. "Little Rigger." She murmured, emotions welling up inside her with such intensity that she couldn't even name them. "Be careful, Master. I'll need your support," he said firmly. MC's POV Rigger sprinted at full speed, healing his wounds as his mana regenerated. His strength and stamina returned, even during his frantic dash. Upon arrival, he saw a few elves firing arrows at fleeing mercenaries. He quickly dispatched the attackers and demanded to know where Verdia Solarion was. After getting a direction, he dashed off without a second thought. He silently thanked himself for his haste. His master was on the brink of death when he arrived. Without hesitation, he unleashed an advanced fire spell, Flame Lance, forcing the old man to retreat. It seemed to work. "Master, are you all right?" She looked exhausted, but her eyes lit up upon seeing him, likely a mix of relief and gratitude for being spared from certain death. However, the situation was grim. Rigger had never defeated Fendrel, and if this saint was as strong as him, he would need help to kill him. For now, he just needed to catch the enemy off guard. He would make him underestimate his abilities. Little Rigger. Verdia murmured softly. Still calling me little. Rigger thought, but chose not to say it aloud. Be careful, master. I'll need your support. The tower they were in was spacious, but fighting here was still dangerous for his master. Rigger quickly scanned his surroundings, analyzing the terrain. Kalinowski maintained a relaxed posture, but the gleam in his eyes betrayed his sharp focus. He was evaluating every movement Rigger made. You seem strong, kid, Kalinowski said, casually twirling his short sword with fluid skill. It'll be a shame to kill such raw talent. Rigger gripped his sword tightly, the blade he had taken from Darien, and activated his magic eye. The world around him seemed to slow for an instant, and he caught Kalinowski's faint movement before the man even executed it. The flow of battle aura around him was eerily similar to Fendrel's. Rigger couldn't afford to lose focus now. Kalinowski lunged with an explosion of speed, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. His sword sliced horizontally, aiming for Rigger's torso. Rigger reacted instinctively, parrying the blow with his sword and twisting his body to the right, using his strength to push Kalinowski back. The old man was shockingly agile, but he lacked Rigger's brute force. He's fast, but if I can trap him in a bad position, I can overpower him. The sound of rustling leaves drew Kalinowski's attention. Too late, he noticed Verdia's arrow flying toward him. He spun around, deflecting it with his sword, but the impact distracted him for a crucial moment. Rigger charged in, attempting to disarm Kalinowski with a vertical strike. But Kalinowski smirked. Do you know who you're fighting, boy? Suddenly, his sword vanished, not in a flash of magic, but in a blur of speed so precise that the blade seemed invisible. Rigger felt the air slice near his face and instinctively leaped back. He barely avoided the strike, but the edge still left a clean cut across his forehead, sending blood spraying. What was that? Rigger gasped, quickly healing the wound. No one becomes a saint without skill, brat. Before Rigger could fully process his opponent's technique, Kalinowski was on him again. His sword, now seemingly invisible, slashed in unpredictable directions. Only Rigger's magic eye, which vaguely perceived the flow of mana, saved him from fatal blows. Even so, small cuts began to accumulate on his arms and legs as he narrowly evaded. Damn it! Rigger muttered. He needed to catch Kalinowski off guard with magic. Looking at the nearby trees, an idea struck him. Master, keep up the pressure with arrows, he called out. Be careful, Rigger. Northern God-style users always have a hidden trick. Verdia warned. She unleashed a flurry of arrows. Kalinowski dodged them with ease, leaping to avoid a strike from Rigger. His jump took him to a tree branch overlooking the clearing. Surprise flickered across his face when a well-placed arrow shattered the branch beneath him. Rigger capitalized on his fall, swinging a lateral strike that would have cleaved Kalinowski in two. But the saint twisted midair, using the force of the blow to propel himself into a safer position, barely escaping. Even so, Rigger's strike cratered the ground, sending debris flying in all directions, some of which grazed Kalinowski. What absurd strength! Kalinowski muttered, slightly impressed. Rigger didn't let the opening slip away. He retreated toward the trees, forcing Kalinowski to follow. This is getting fun, boy. What other tricks do you have? The old man taunted. The dense forest restricted Kalinowski's movements, making it harder for him to use his invisible sword technique effectively. The saint attacked again. The two clashed as they moved through the dense vegetation, roots and vines slowing them down. Rigger deliberately used the terrain to his advantage, a strategy that didn't go unnoticed by his opponent. You're clever, boy, but still too green. Kalinowski suddenly hurled his sword at Rigger, who barely dodged it. In the same instant, the saint drew two short blades and lunged low, aiming for Rigger's ankles. Rigger evaded, but a stray root caused him to stumble, leaving him vulnerable. A deep cut slashed his left leg. Ag. Got you. Kalinowski shouted, going in for the kill. Before the blade could reach him, a single arrow whizzed past, grazing Kalinowski's head. It was just enough to disrupt his attack, sparing Rigger from a fatal throat wound. Master. Rigger called out, grateful. Verdia, hidden behind a tree, knocked another arrow with precision. Despite her exhaustion, her aim was steady. Rigger seized the moment to counterattack, extended his hand, whispering a spell, Sonic Burst. A sudden gale hurled Kalinowski backward, slamming him into a tree. His surprise was evident as he collided, momentarily losing his orientation. Rigger didn't waste the chance. He invoked Earth Spikes, summoning jagged stone pillars beneath the saint. Kalinowski reacted with monkey-like agility, leaping away. But the spikes tore through his torso and left leg. The old man laughed through the pain. Ha ha ha, chantless magic. Rigger gave him no time to rest. The two clashed fiercely among the trees, each aiming for vital points throughout the battle. Rigger used his strength and magic to press the North Saint into a corner, while Kalinowski relied on his technique and experience to try to maintain control, though his bleeding leg and torso hindered his movement significantly. The battle was starting to shift in Rigger's favor. He could tell Kalinowski was slowing down, and his magic was beginning to predict the old man's movements. Just one decisive strike. Rigger thought, panting but resolute. He kept his breathing steady, even as sweat dripped down his face. His body was covered in cuts and scratches, and he was starting to feel dizzy. His strikes grew more erratic, and his senses blurred. It didn't take long for him to identify his condition. Damn it. Poison. Kalinowski, on the other hand, was also showing signs of exhaustion. His technique was still impeccable, but his movements had lost their fluidity. Verdia, hiding among the trees, carefully adjusted her bowstring. Even with her evident fatigue, she knew she couldn't stop. Each arrow she fired served to keep the North Saint under pressure and provide Rigger with much-needed openings. Are you immune to poison, kid? You should have been on the ground by now. Kalinowski shouted, his voice laced with mockery as he backed away slightly. You two are more persistent than I expected, he said, his tone heavy with frustration. But this little game ends now. With a swift motion, Kalinowski stomped his enchanted boot against the ground, activating a series of magical runes beneath him. A blast of wind erupted, sending dust and leaves flying as he propelled himself high into the air. Master. Watch out. Rigger shouted, using a gust of wind magic to propel himself forward in a desperate attempt to intercept. When the dust settled, Kalinowski was perched on a tree branch near Verdia. In one fluid motion, he leapt down with both short swords aimed at her. The air rippled dangerously as he closed the distance. The boy's tough, but if I complete my mission, this will be worth it. Rigger screamed in desperation, bounding between the trees with all his might. He knew he wouldn't make it in time. What kind of boots are those? A magical item? He wondered briefly before realizing he had no other choice. If he couldn't close the gap physically, he'd have to gamble everything on one move. Even if it didn't work, it might be enough to save his master. He lacked the time to cast a spell, so he theorized that he could channel the magic directly into his sword. A technique like Flame Slice would be perfect. With a quick motion, Rigger poured his mana into his blade. Intense flames erupted around it, forming a blazing arc that illuminated the devastated clearing. Kalinowski caught sight of the flames in the corner of his vision and calculated quickly. He believed he could still kill Verdia and dodge the incoming attack. He didn't slow down. Verdia threw herself backward, trying to avoid Kalinowski's blade, as Rigger timed his strike for the last possible second. Flame Slice. Rigger swung his blade in a fluid arc, releasing a fiery crescent that surged forward like a blazing bolt of lightning. The heat was so intense it made the air ripple visibly. Kalinowski tried to evade at the last moment, but it was too late. The fiery blade struck his side, sending him flying backward with an explosive impact. He crashed into a massive tree, splitting its thick trunk nearly in half. A cauterized wound ran deep across his torso. Rigger held his stance for a moment, panting heavily as the flames around his sword gradually subsided. The North Saint was still alive, but barely. Blood dripped from his mouth as he leaned against the cracked tree, a faint smile on his face. Heh, killed by a kid. Hey brat, make sure you tell people I was the first Saint-level opponent you defeated. That'll give me some fame in the afterlife, Kalinowski coughed, blood splattering with his words. I didn't expect to find such a gem at the end of my life. If we'd been on the same side, I'd have loved to teach you the way of the sword. His voice grew weaker until his eyes finally lost their light. Rigor turned to his master. Are you hurt, master? He asked urgently. Verdia, still catching her breath, gave him a faint smile as she glanced at his battered and bloodied body. Not a scratch, she replied, her tone light despite the exhaustion in her voice. With the North Saint defeated, Rigor and Verdia hurried back to the elven village. When they arrived, the sight was sobering. Though there hadn't been many casualties thanks to their efforts, each loss was deeply felt. The surviving elves were already working together to rebuild what they had lost. The village leader approached them with reverence, bowing deeply. We couldn't have survived without you, he said, gratitude filling his voice. Rigor, however, seemed distracted. He glanced at Verdia, who was clearly exhausted but still standing. Master, are you okay? Yes, little Rigor, Verdia replied with a soft smile, though her face betrayed her fatigue. What about your tribe? How are they? Rigor hesitated, his expression growing somber. Memories of his last actions before leaving flashed through his mind, and he felt a pang of guilt. Master, can I stay here in the elven village for a while? He asked anxiously. Verdia seemed surprised, but nodded. Of course, Rigor. Stay as long as you need, but send a letter home, all right? Rigor nodded. He had much to think about, and even more to do. The silence of the forest felt denser than usual as Rigor adjusted his breathing after his morning training. He had already realized that his magic wasn't fast enough for high-speed battles, even when cast without incantation. After landing a surprise first strike, he would struggle to hit a prepared and agile warrior. Because of this, he was training to replicate what he had done in the battle against the Northern Saint, trying to reduce his magic's casting time. As always, Verdia watched him intently, evaluating every move. The past 2 months spent with her had been eye-opening, not just due to the intensity of the training, but also because of the stories she shared. His mentor was far more than she appeared. Her knowledge of magic was astounding, but what truly stood out in her narratives was the weight of her adventures. Rigor discovered that she wasn't just an experienced mage, she was a king-level mage in wind and earth, as well as a water saint. According to her, she had made enemies during her ventures, and her power remained a threat to the successors of those enemies, even though she bore no grudge against them. Despite her confidence, Verdia revealed a more human side when addressing her struggles. Rigor, in turn, shared the issue that gnawed at him internally, his lack of control over his savagery. He explained how, in moments of rage, he was on the verge of completely losing control, his rationality vanishing as his feral instincts took over. This had led him to attack his father and other warriors in the tribe. Verdia had no ready answers, but promised they would find a solution together. During the second month, Verdia brought him news. An elder elf named Ilya wished to meet him. Intrigued, Rigor followed her to an isolated clearing where the presence of the silver-haired elf was almost mystical. Her eyes carried the weight of centuries, and her voice was as calm as the whispering trees. You resemble your grandfather, Rigor, Ilya began, her gaze studying the young Didoldia. Except for your eyes, of course. Verdia told me about you. I believe my knowledge may be helpful for your problem. HM? What do you mean? Your struggle to control your instincts. Ilya explained that many years ago, her mother had told her stories about the second beast god Geiger. He, like Rigor, had faced bouts of savagery in his youth. He was the first recorded case, though there may have been others before him who didn't leave as much of an impact. According to her, the problem wasn't uncommon among the most talented of the beast race. All those who displayed extraordinary potential faced similar challenges. She cited a personal example, Inger Didoldia, a warrior who had reached the rank of emperor 600 years ago. She had been very close to this warrior during his lifetime. Inger was wild as a child. I can say that because I saw him grow up from a baby, Ilya said nostalgically. When he chose the path of the warrior, a demon passing through this area accepted him as a disciple. Years later he returned, and his savagery had become a controlled weapon, no longer something that dominated him, though he was still quite energetic. I asked him what had changed, and he told me he had learned to channel all his aggression into his axe. He wasn't very bright, after all. But you are, or so Verdia tells me. You should understand. Ilya then shared her theory. Knowing that Tuki or battle aura is the mana flowing through an individual's body, she hypothesized that when disciplined, It allows one to gain greater control over strength, speed, senses, and consequently, instincts. From her understanding of battle aura, people gained better control over it upon reaching the rank of saint. She recommended Rigger aim for that level as a starting goal. It wasn't easy, of course. There had been few cases, but Rigger didn't need to fear or suppress his essence. He needed to learn to control the strength that stemmed from it. This revelation sent Rigger into deep reflection. He began re-evaluating his recent actions, his attacks on his allies, his impulsive decisions in combat. Perhaps his growing strength was both a blessing and a curse, something he needed to master to achieve his goals. From what Verdia has told me, your strength is already absurd for your age, so it shouldn't be too hard. She concluded, sizing him up. That night, as he gazed at the stars, Rigger decided it was time to return to his tribe and share what he had learned. Knowing that others had faced this problem and overcome it made him feel more confident. He knew the journey ahead would be long, but now, more than ever, he had a renewed focus. Verdia decided to follow him to continue his training. They said their goodbyes and set off. The journey back to the Dodoldia tribe was silent yet meaningful. Verdia walked beside him, occasionally sharing small observations about the surrounding landscapes but respecting the young man's introspection. When they arrived at the village, the atmosphere felt tense. Some villagers watched them with distrustful glances, while others showed expressions of concern. Rigger's outburst months ago was still fresh in many minds, and the rumors of what he had done and endured in battle only fueled divided opinions. The first person to meet him upon entering the village was Celine, his mother. Her worried eyes scanned her son with the intensity of a protective parent. She noticed the small scars on his arms, the steadier gaze, and the more disciplined posture. "Are you okay, my son?" she asked, pulling him into a tight hug. "I am, mother. I'm sorry for worrying you this time." Celine seemed relieved, but there was still tension in the air. It wasn't just concern. There was something more, as if she knew Rigger's decisions would lead him down an even more dangerous path. Soon after settling in, Rigger requested a meeting with Gustav, Guys, Fendrel, and his father Hontar. He knew he needed to clarify everything that had happened and pave the way for moving forward without leaving loose ends. At the meeting, he began with an apology. "I made a mistake. My outburst wasn't just a reaction to the situation, but a reflection of my lack of control over myself. And because of it, I almost killed one of our own." Guys spoke sternly. "It wasn't just that. You disobeyed orders not to pursue the enemy, forcing us to follow you and putting your companions at risk." Hontar glared at him but said nothing. Rigger felt the pressure. No one would defend him here. If something had gone wrong, he could have caused a disaster. He had been lucky, and he knew he couldn't keep relying on luck. This is by no means an excuse. I won't shy away from my responsibility, but I've discovered the reason for this lack of control and how to fix it during my time in the Elven village. He then shared what he had learned from Ilya, including all the relevant information to help them understand. "I made an unforgivable mistake because of this. But now I know I can control it, and I promise I won't let it happen again." The room was silent for a moment before Fendrel spoke. Having lost an arm in Darian's ambush, he wore an expression of seriousness. "You're still young, Rigger. Sometimes I forget that because you seem so mature and are already so strong. But I feel a bit guilty, with 4 of us intimidating a child. Young or not, we all make mistakes. What matters is what you'll do with this now. If you're committed to correcting your errors, I'll be here to help you, even with 1 arm." Fendrel then offered his assistance in Rigger's training, emphasizing that despite his physical limitations, he was still the only saint-level warrior in the tribe. His words brought an unexpected sense of unity to the group. Rigger finally relaxed a bit, the weight on his shoulders easing significantly. He then recounted the events that had led him to the Elven village, the battle against the final 3 members of the Black Frost, the confrontation with Darian, the fight against the Northern Saint, and the revelation that the noble who had hired the assassins might still pose a threat to Verdia. "I can't ignore this danger," Rigger declared firmly. "If this noble tried to eliminate Verdia once, he might try again. And if he's a threat to my mentor, then he's a threat to me as well." Gustav and Guys agreed, albeit with some reservations, recognizing Verdia's contributions to the tribe during her time there. Hontar, on the other hand, supported his son with a subtle nod. Rigger's decision to confront such a powerful enemy directly was dangerous, but it also showcased his unwavering determination. After the meeting, Celine surprised everyone by inviting Verdia to live with them while continuing Rigger's magical training. Though hesitant at first, Verdia ultimately accepted, noting that there was still much she needed to teach the young Doldia. That evening, as the village quieted down, Rigger revisited his reflections. He stared up at the star-filled sky, recalling Ilya's words, Verdia's teachings, and the repercussions of his past actions. He realized that his goals needed refinement. The wind rushed through the forest, rustling leaves and cooling Rigger's face as he organized his thoughts and actions. He understood that moving forward required more than apologies or promises. It demanded strength, discipline, and reliable allies. In the courtyard of his home, alongside Verdia and his mother, Rigger began to strategize his next steps. Recent events had profoundly shaped him. His mind wandered back to the battles he had fought, the lessons learned, and the dangers looming on the horizon. The world around him was far vaster and more perilous than he had imagined, demanding preparation beyond what he thought was necessary. The morality of this world differed sharply from his previous one, as it brimmed with superhuman beings, near-omnipotent magic, gods, and demons. If this world has its own rules, I need to learn them, Rigger murmured, staring at his sword. I need to grow stronger, not just for myself but for my tribe, my family, and so I can live according to my will. He mentally organized his goals, reach sword saint level, and control his savagery. Controlling his power was his top priority. To achieve this, he committed to intensive training with Fendrel, his father, and other warriors while delving into the theories shared by Ilya. Build a network of strong allies. Rigger understood that individual strength alone wasn't enough in a world where even the most powerful kingdoms were ruled by weak kings. He resolved to gather trustworthy and capable individuals to protect his tribe and tackle future challenges. Eliminate the noble who is threatening Verdia. He couldn't ignore the man who attempted to take Verdia's life. This enemy was a persistent danger, and Rigger vowed to ensure the threat would no longer linger. Lay a foundation for the future. Beyond addressing immediate concerns, Rigger saw his strength as a resource with greater purpose. Everyone around him referred to him as a rare talent, and he resolved to make the most of it, contemplating how to unite and mobilize those around him to create something enduring. The following day, Rigger assembled the young warriors and mages he had previously trained, along with his 5 chosen leaders, Killian, Taze, Lysena, Erat, and Leone. With a determined gaze, he addressed them. You've done well in your training so far, but there's still much to do. The challenges ahead will be unlike anything you've faced before, and I need you to be ready. If anyone here isn't willing to continue, I won't stop you. In fact, I encourage you to step away because this group will only move forward with those who have unwavering determination. He paused, observing them. No one moved. Instead, their eyes gleamed with admiration and excitement. Strange. They're just a bunch of kids. I thought some would be intimidated. Could this be the spirit of unity? He then announced the creation of an organization, a group bound by a shared purpose, to protect the Great Forest and expand their influence to ensure the Doldia tribe's survival. The name he chose evoked strength and unity, the Iron Legion. The Iron Legion will be the wall that shields our people, but also the blade that cuts down any threat, Rigger declared. Train hard and hone your skills because each of you will play a vital role in the future. This day would later be remembered as a turning point in world history, the birth of the Iron Legion. In the weeks that followed, Rigger immersed himself in rigorous training with Fendrel and Verdia. Under Fendrel's guidance, he progressed rapidly in the sword god style, finding it almost tailor-made for him. He also began mastering the fundamentals of Tuki, the battle aura he had unknowingly used before but now sought to wield consciously. Verdia intensified his magical studies, particularly in elemental control and advanced spellcasting across all schools of magic she knew. During these sessions, Rigger felt himself transforming. His explosive, untamed power was gradually becoming refined, focused, and even more formidable. One evening, as he stood overlooking his tribe at sunset, Rigger reflected on everything he had learned so far. He acknowledged that this was just the beginning of his journey, but for the first time, he felt a clear sense of purpose. This world isn't like my old one and never will be, he thought, gazing at the horizon. But maybe that's what makes it so challenging. If there's something I can do to protect the people I love and change the course of this place, I'll do it. I'll live on my terms, and anyone who threatens my family will become my enemy. His thoughts drifted briefly to his previous life. After 6 years, The sense of loss had faded. This world was now his reality. He wouldn't forget who he had been, but he wouldn't let it hold him back either. His mind then returned to the noble who endangered Verdia. Allowing such a danger to persist was unthinkable. He knew action would be required sooner rather than later. With that resolve, Rigger closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decisions and the clarity of his newfound determination. He was ready for whatever came next. If this world demands strength, then strength it shall have. But don't blame me if the damage I cause is irreversible. Current status: age, 6 years and 3 months. Mana reserves: King level magical skills, Fire Magic, Advanced Earth Magic, Advanced Water Magic, Intermediate Wind Magic, Intermediate Healing Magic, Intermediate Detoxification Magic, Beginner Howling Magic, Minor Mastery Mixed Spells, Lava Ball, Mud Field, Mud Trap, Blizzard, Fog Wave. Combat skills: North God Style, Intermediate Sword God Style, Advanced Combat with Natural Weapons, Claws, Instincts, etc. Advanced Battle Strength, Saint level. Warrior intellectual skills: Reading and writing in Beast God and Human languages. Mathematics, University level. Practical skills: Excellent Hunter, Good Teacher, Terrible Cook. If you seek power, travel onward. Your destination is the Demon Continent. Journey through its lands. Ascend to Necros Fortress. Before the Demon King, prove your strength and you may wish for even greater power. Only then can the power of conquest be yours. The sound of blades cutting through the air, spells crackling, and coordinated shouts echoed through the forest. The smell of overturned earth and embers filled the air as around 10 children faced a colossal creature, a land lizard nearly 4 meters long, with a rigid sun-reflecting carapace. A young Doldia with dark brown hair marked with lighter streaks and red eyes stood at the forefront, leading the attack. His serious gaze, rigid posture, and determined movements showed that he took his role seriously. Frontline group: distract it, but keep your distance. Magic unit: attack with long-range spells. Rigger observed from the shadows among the trees, his sharp eyes following every detail of the scene. Good choice, he thought, analyzing the situation. Engaging this creature in close combat would be suicide. But will they find a way to finish it off? Lead it closer to the trees. Killian shouted as he ran, beginning to focus a wind spell. 2 young warriors followed his orders. One conjured a stone bullet that hit the lizard's face, grabbing its attention, while the other used a gust of wind to steer the already injured creature toward the forest line. Killian had accumulated enough mana for his wind spell. Jumping between the trees, he leaped over the monster and shouted, "Wind Blade!" He slashed in a perfect arc, his sword channeling the magic into the lizard's neck with surgical precision, severing its head. Blood oozed slowly, staining the grass as the creature collapsed with a muffled thud. Rigger stepped forward from the shadows, clapping slowly, the sound drawing everyone's attention. The children turned to him, some sweaty and breathless, but all with a glimmer of pride in their eyes. "Excellent work," Rigger said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "You coordinated your attacks well. Killian, your leadership was impeccable. Doug, your use of magic was clever. Loin, be mindful not to overuse mana in your spells. It burns too quickly when overloaded." The children nodded, some exchanging excited glances, others shy under the weight of his praise. Killian, however, beamed with pride. "Thank you, Chief," he replied, sheathing his sword. "We just followed your teachings as best we could. We're not as strong as you yet, but strength is just one factor," Rigger interrupted, his expression serious but kind. "You demonstrated teamwork, and that's something not easily learned. Keep it up." The young warriors celebrated quietly, tending to their minor injuries. Rigger watched them for a moment, his thoughts drifting. They're growing quickly. Soon, they'll be able to face challenges that even veteran warriors would struggle with. Perhaps even more than that. The Iron Legion had grown far beyond what Rigger had envisioned when he first created it. What started as an experiment with children had now attracted adult warriors, veterans who volunteered to train under his leadership. He hadn't expected such acceptance. "They trust me, but do they understand what I'm doing?" he pondered as he walked back to the village, hearing the distant sound of the children laughing and talking about the battle. Training so many warriors and building a unified force could be seen as a political move. But here, everyone is just happy to see the tribe grow stronger. That's one of the advantages of the beast races. When he reached the village, He was greeted by the warm smile of his mother, Celine, who was busy carrying baskets of herbs and freshly gathered fruit. "How was the training, dear?" she asked, handing him one of the baskets. "Did young Killian do well?" "He did. He's definitely talented," Rigger replied, taking the weight effortlessly. "They'll be ready if needed. The attacks have subsided, but we know it's only temporary. And I won't always be here to protect them." Celine paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she studied her son's face. "When do you plan to leave?" Rigger hesitated, but couldn't lie to her. "Not yet. I hope to learn as much as I can from Verdia and Fendrel before I go, but maybe in a year or two." "Then there's still time," she said softly. "Guide those children well, not just in strength, but in principles. You may be young, but I trust your wisdom to make the right choices." Rigger nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier on his shoulders. Later that evening, after dinner, he headed to the clearing where he often trained alone. Under the faint light of the stars, he began conjuring wind magic around his body. He was working on perfecting his dream spell, Flight. Inspired by the propulsion boots used by the North Saint in their battle, Rigger had developed ideas of his own. Although the spell was functional, it was still unstable. That night, he focused on improving its control. This took longer than expected. "I guess Master was right when she said wind magic wasn't my strongest suit." Hovering a few meters above the ground, he felt a surge of energy flow through him, connecting him to the surrounding environment. Landing softly, he exhaled heavily but smiled. "I'm getting there. Soon, I might even soar like the eagles that fly over the great forest." Besides developing his flight magic, he had also been training to imbue his sword and fists with various magical enhancements. Now, he was working on accelerating his spellcasting as much as possible. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a familiar presence. Fendrel, his sword god-style mentor, stood nearby, watching him with crossed arms. "You're playing around with magic too much, kid," Fendrel said. "If you want to reach Sword Saint level, you need to focus. No distractions." "And what if my path is to combine the two?" Rigger challenged, his gaze unwavering. Fendrel let out a short laugh. "With your talent in both, I wouldn't doubt it. But for now, you need practice. Come on, let's spar." Drawing his sword with his single arm, Fendrel gestured for Rigger to attack. Rigger smiled, unsheathing his blade as the stars illuminated their makeshift battlefield. The next morning arrived under a clear sky. The village buzzed with anticipation. Today the sacred beast, believed to one day save the world alongside the hero, would be introduced to the tribe's leading members. Until now, the creature had been kept hidden, as it was still very young, and the tribe was contending with frequent attacks from slave traders. Rigger, accompanied by his mentor Verdia and several elders, walked toward the sanctuary where the sacred beast was being safeguarded. His mind brimmed with curiosity and speculation. If the sacred beast is truly connected to the spirits of the forest, does that mean it has its own mana, or is it merely a conduit for the energy around it, he pondered. And why does only one emerge each generation? Is it a natural phenomenon, or something more mystical? Verdia, noticing Rigger's furrowed brow, chuckled softly. "Trying to uncover its secrets before you've even laid eyes on it, Rigger?" He offered a faint smile. "Perhaps. But you must admit, it's incredibly intriguing." "Sometimes, mystery is what makes something valuable," Verdia said. "Not everything needs to be understood right away." He nodded but knew his curiosity wouldn't be quelled so easily. Upon reaching the sanctuary, Rigger felt a shiver run down his spine. A subtle but potent magical barrier enveloped the space. Inside, nestled comfortably, lay the sacred beast, a young, endearing creature with fur as radiant as freshly fallen snow. Its jet-black eyes shimmered with innocence and curiosity. Rigger caught his breath. For a moment, he felt an inexplicable connection, not merely through sight but something deeper, almost spiritual. "It's incredible," he murmured. Was this awe something innate to his race's bond with the sacred beast? No wonder they revered it as divine. Verdia approached, her gaze shifting between the creature and Rigger. "The sacred beast is more than a symbol, Rigger. It is the link between our tribes and the spirits of the forest. Caring for it is a shared responsibility for all of us." As Rigger met the sacred beast's eyes, a flicker of mana coursed through his body. The creature stared back with an intensity he'd never experienced, as though it were evaluating him. Then, without warning, the sacred beast wagged its tail energetically and trotted toward Rigger, leaping into his arms with a delighted bark. "Sacred beast!" one of the caretakers exclaimed, rushing forward to gently guide it back. Everyone present was stunned. The sacred beast had taken an immediate liking to Rigger. It barked again, and Rigger felt its energy settle into a calm rhythm. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he felt a strange sense of acceptance. Later, after leaving the sanctuary, Rigger returned to the training grounds where the children of the Iron Legion were gathered. Killian, Lysena, Taze, and the others were immersed in combat drills but quickly paused when they saw Rigger approach. "What's the sacred beast like, Chief?" Killian asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "It's hard to put into words," Rigger replied thoughtfully. "It's powerful, but in a way that transcends physical or magical strength. It feels as though the forest itself is alive through it." The children exchanged glances, visibly awed. "Do you think we'll still be alive when the hero appears?" Persina asked softly. "What are you talking about?" "Of course the hero is the chief," Killian declared confidently. "Yeah, if there's any hero who'll save the world, it's the chief." Linnea chimed in. The group burst into laughter, their camaraderie lighting up the training grounds. After their session, Rigger headed to the makeshift arena where Fendrel awaited him. The grizzled warrior, who had taken it upon himself to instruct Rigger in the sword god style, stood with his blade already drawn, his stance as rigid as always. "You're late," Fendrel grumbled, though there was a teasing undertone to his words. "I was busy with the sacred beast," Rigger said, unsheathing his sword. "But perhaps it will inspire me today." They faced off in an intense duel. Fendrel, despite missing an arm, was relentless. His skill as an advanced-level swordsman forced Rigger to constantly adapt his stances and movements, relying solely on the sword god style. "You're already at the peak of advanced level," Fendrel said between strikes. "What's left is refining your longsword of silence until it becomes a longsword of light." "I know, but it's a difficult barrier. I can see the path, but I can't seem to break through it." Later that evening, as Rigger made his way home, he was interrupted by familiar voices. Linnea and Persina burst into his workshop, Linnea bounding in energetically while Persina trailed behind, chewing on a piece of meat. "Chief, we finished today's drills," Linnea announced. "But they were too easy," Persina added, her tone casual. Rigger chuckled. At 4 years old, their growth was astounding. The more he trained them, the more he recognized their talent, not only in magic but also in physical combat. Linnea seemed drawn to the sword god style, while Persina showed promise for the water god style. Finding a suitable instructor for that school of swordsmanship was now on his growing to-do list. "Easy, huh? Then let's move on to something more advanced," Rigger said, leading them to a nearby field. He picked up a short sword, channeling Frost Nova into the blade. With a swift horizontal swing, a wave of icy energy erupted, freezing the entire training ground. The trick isn't just channeling magic, but controlling it. Your weapon should feel like an extension of your body. First exercise, reshape the magic after it's been created. "That's simple," Linnea exclaimed, attempting to form a fireball and alter its shape midair, only for it to dissipate into embers. Persina tried using water magic and fared slightly better. "Not bad for a first attempt," Rigger said, encouragingly. "But remember, this isn't just about strength or technical skill. It's about intent. If the magic doesn't flow naturally, it will never reach its full potential." The two nodded, their eyes gleaming with determination. "Do you think we can become as strong as you?" Persina asked, her voice filled with hope. Rigger hesitated for a moment before smiling. "If you keep working hard, who knows? You both have immense potential. Just always remember the reason behind your pursuit of strength." Deep down, he doubted they would surpass him, unless he allowed it. His own relentless training ensured his edge. Yet, with their talents, Linnea and Persina were destined to become pillars of the beast race. It would be his duty to guide them, ensuring they didn't succumb to needless arrogance, for that often led to ruin. Current status: age, 7 years and 2 months. Mana reserves, Emperor-level magical skills, fire magic, advanced earth magic, advanced water magic, advanced wind magic, advanced healing magic, advanced detoxification magic, intermediate barrier magic, elementary howling magic, mastery combat skills, North God style, advanced sword God style, advanced combat with natural weapons, claws, instincts, etc. Advanced battle strength, high saint level warrior intellectual skills, reading and writing in, beast god and human languages mathematics, university level, practical skills, excellent hunter, good teacher, terrible cook. In the middle of the night, a beast-like boy leaped from tree to tree in a remote area far from the tribe. As he ran through the forest under the moonlight, Rigger found Verdia. The mage was sitting on a log, surrounded by small fireflies that softly glowed, casting a special charm on her golden hair. "Shall we?" she said, not even looking at him. "Yes, I'm ready." We then traveled deeper into the great forest. The night brought some beasts, but we didn't venture into any dangerous territory. "This will be safe," she declared, her voice calm and serene. "Now, little Rigger, I will demonstrate once, so pay close attention." The young Doldia nodded reverently, his pointed ears leaning forward, showing his full attention to the moment. She closed her eyes, holding her staff firmly, and began chanting. The air around them became dense, as though the earth itself was waiting in anticipation. The stones beneath their feet began to vibrate, and a golden aura surrounded Verdia, radiating an ancient power. "Ancient Earth, guardian of the ages and foundation of the world, hear my call. Rise from your eternal depth. Rise like mountains that challenge the skies and manifest your unshakable glory. Cloak me with the unbreakable strength of your domains. Make me the bastion that faces the infinite. Divine manifestation of eternal firmness, fortress of the Colossus." The ground trembled deeply as the magic took shape. Rocks and minerals began to spiral upward, molding into towers and walls that grew taller than the trees. Massive pillars held up a colossal stone roof, reinforced with golden cracks that ran through the structure like veins pulsing with magical energy. The fortress of the Colossus stood imposing, with impregnable walls and powerful bastions, radiating the essence of unshakable earth, as though it had emerged from the depths to protect everything within its reach. Rigger watched in awe, the complexities of creating this magic clearly visible to his magical eye. Verdia finished the conjuring, and though the occasional fortress was no longer as strong as it had been while being reinforced by magic, the stones now revealed their true nature. It was still very impressive. Rigger nodded, his eyes shining with determination. Then he stepped forward, while Verdia watched him closely. He began, "Ancient Earth, guardian of the ages and foundation of the world, hear my call. Rise from your eternal depth. Rise like mountains that challenge the skies and manifest your unshakable glory. Cloak me with the unbreakable strength of your domains, divine manifestation of eternal firmness, fortress of the Colossus." As the magic began to take form, the ground trembled. From the earth, green stone pillars began to rise, connecting as though sculpted by an invisible artist. He noticed how different minerals were used, minerals he hadn't recognized before, an extremely resistant brown mineral, another that seemed resistant to heat. As he channeled his mana through the structure, everything held together, emanating a pulsating energy. He recognized the complexity of saint-level magics. As he watched the fortress grow, he realized that it wasn't just a physical barrier. The way the minerals interacted created points to absorb impact and dissipate magical energy, making the structure nearly impossible to collapse. When it finished, a formidable stronghold stood before him, as resilient as it was functional. Rigger nodded, satisfied, realizing that he had created not just a defense, but a marker of his evolution as a mage. "Congratulations, little Rigger, you can now be considered the youngest saint-level mage, a true saint of Earth," said his master, smiling joyfully, looking proud. The next day, Rigger called one of the tribe's warriors, a member of the Iron Legion who patrolled the outskirts of the great forest. He was someone Rigger trusted absolutely, someone he had observed for a while. "I have a mission for you, Oigar," began Rigger, his tone serious, making him sound twice his actual age. "I want you to find an instructor in the water god style in the human cities. Advanced level, if possible, but there's a higher priority: trust." The warrior furrowed his brow, absorbing Rigger's words. "I understand, Chief. But the great forest attracts adventurers of dubious interests. How can I be sure the right person will be willing to teach here?" Rigger took a deep breath. This was his concern. "That's why I trust this mission to you. You've always been good at judging people. Find someone who poses no threat, even if they're not advanced level. The priority is ensuring that anyone who comes here doesn't jeopardize our security." They must be trustworthy above all. The warrior nodded and gave a respectful salute before departing to prepare for the journey. In the following weeks, Rigger delved even deeper into his magical experiments. His focus on learning from Verdia included barrier magic and saint-level wind magic, and recently she had begun teaching him about magic circles. His small workshop, situated at the edge of the village, had become almost a sacred space. There, surrounded by stones and minerals, study scrolls, and makeshift tools, he explored the infinite possibilities of magic. That afternoon, as he manipulated a stone cannon shaped like a cone, made from heat-resistant rock, Rigger tried spinning it as fast as possible, creating intense friction, almost setting it on fire, eventually making the spell lethally powerful. Seems good. I need to test wind spells to create vacuum magic, like Shimura Danzo in Naruto. This could be dangerous. I have to take precautions to ensure nothing goes wrong. But if I succeed, it will be deadly. He jotted down notes in a notebook, his mind teeming with ideas. Traditional magic was effective, but also limited. He wanted more. Summoning magic of the armored Dragon King's spirits, Aramanfi's light, the brilliant, even gravity control from the Dragon King's sword Kajikut. According to my master, all of these are real. If these kinds of spells truly exist, learning them would elevate my combat power to another level. But it's not something I can create out of nowhere without references on how they work. This isn't like creating magma or steam. I need a place to learn high-level magics when I leave here. My master already knows Wind and Earth King's magic. I hope these two will give me new ideas like the Fortress of the Colossus. Rigger then felt the need to test his combat skills. He needed to surpass his own limits, both in magic and hand-to-hand combat. He left the village alone, running lightly and quickly through the dense vegetation. The forest became more alive at night, with predators ready to ambush at every step. Rigger held his sword at his side, his eyes glowing with determination. His mind, however, was restless. He had already learned all Geru could teach him in the North God style, and there was no teacher to show him how to go further. In the Sword God style, he was close to Saint level, but something was still missing, a connection between technique and speed. He was agile, yes, but not as fast as he imagined he could be. I need to think outside the box. As he moved, he remembered his past life. There were characters in anime who were incredibly fast, moving almost as if they vanished from sight. Techniques like Shuinpa from Bleach and Soru from One Piece came to mind. He could try replicating those with Tuki and wind magic. The forest opened into a clearing, and Rigger paused for a moment. He would test his theories here. Summoning his earth magic, he shaped the ground beneath his feet, creating a perfect circle of durable earth. To begin, you need a solid foundation. He took a deep breath, channeling mana into his feet. The idea was to use wind and earth magic simultaneously to amplify his movements, along with using Tuki in a burst of speed. With wind magic, he reduced friction on the ground and around his body. With earth magic, he created small bursts that would propel him forward at high speed. If it works, I'll have something close to what I've seen in anime. He started slow, first reducing the friction around him. He felt the air lighten, almost as if he were about to float. Then, he bent his knees and focused energy into his feet. The first leap was short and awkward, but he could already feel the difference. The movement was faster than anything he had ever experienced. Not enough. He tried again, this time adjusting the flow of mana. The earth magic pulses had to be more controlled, synchronized with the moment his feet touched the ground. The next movement was a success. He moved almost as fast as Fendrel with the longsword of light. His heart raced with adrenaline. Almost there, still not usable in combat yet though. It requires too much concentration, and my control is awful. I could fly straight into a monster's mouth, but it's feasible. Rigger spent some time trying to repeat the movement, but realized his control over earth magic still wasn't good enough. He had excellent control over wind magic due to his flight training. He reinforced once again that gaining greater control over the elements would only bring good things and allow him to create many new techniques. If this works in combat, I'll be able to face much stronger enemies. The technique still lacked a name, something that represented the concept of fast and precise movement. He thought for a moment before smiling. Flash step. It sounded simple, but Rigger knew that this skill was just the beginning of many techniques he planned to create. The moon lit the forest as Rigger walked, attentive to every sound around him. He was looking for a worthy opponent, something that would truly test his newly developed skills. It didn't take long for the opportunity to arise. A deep roar echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of trees crashing down. He approached, climbing a tall tree to assess the terrain. There it was, a colossal creature about 15 meters long, covered in scales as hard as steel, the scaled tyrant, a monstrous crocodile of rank A, known for its immense strength and almost perfect camouflage in swampy terrains. This is it. A perfect challenge. The tyrant detected his presence, turning its massive head toward Rigor. Without hesitation, he jumped from the tree, sword in hand, and cast an offensive spell before hitting the ground. Stone Cannon. A cone-shaped stone projectile was launched at high speed directly toward the creature. The impact resounded loudly, lifting a cloud of dust and forcing the monster to retreat a few meters. However, when the dust settled, Rigor saw that the monster had barely been scratched. These scales are really tough. The monster roared, charging with surprising speed for its size. Rigor propelled himself into the air with a jump and wind magic, watching the tyrant smash the trees around it. In mid-air, he cast another spell. His sword glowed red, fire gathering on the blade, another one he would have to discard after the battle, as none of them could withstand this magic. Flame Slice. His sword blazed with fiery light before releasing a fiery arc that sliced through the air toward the monster. The flame hit the tyrant's flank, exploding in fire around it, causing a roar of pain, but not enough to bring it down. Rigor landed quickly and began to alter the terrain to his advantage. He channeled mana into his feet and struck the ground with force. Rising Wall. Stone barriers rose around the monster, limiting its movement and creating an improvised maze. The tyrant, furious, began to blindly attack the walls, creating openings. Rigor took advantage of the distraction and advanced, strengthening his legs with Tuki, clearly seeing the monster's movements with his magic eye, even behind the walls. As the crocodile destroyed another wall, Rigor ran through the broken walls, reaching a spot out of the monster's sight, and used the characteristic move from the Sword God style. Longsword of Silence. He slid along the monster's flank, leaving a long cut. This provoked a wild roar from the creature, which narrowly missed him with its tail. He cast another spell, this time focusing on restricting the monster's movements. Channeling mana into the ground, a mud field emerged, wrapping around the monster's legs. Mud Trap. The scaled tyrant struggled violently to free itself, but every second trapped was an opportunity for Rigor to strike. He ran forward, charging his sword with even stronger flames, and delivered a horizontal strike to the same wound as before. The flames engulfed the battlefield. This time, the cut was deeper, breaking scales and exposing half-burned flesh. The monster finally broke free and launched a sudden attack, swinging its massive body and slamming its tail like a battering ram. The impact was devastating, destroying the remaining stone walls and hitting Rigor, who was sent flying. He spun a few times before skidding across the ground, jumping to the side to avoid the beast chasing him, grateful that he had used wind magic at the last second to throw himself back, reducing the impact. Rigor landed on the ground and began to channel mana on a large scale. He pressed both hands to the earth, channeling his mana. Icicle Field. The ice quickly reached the tyrant, charging toward him like a bull, freezing the lower half of its body. Seizing the opening, Rigor ran at high speed, channeling mana into his legs and arms. He jumped directly over the monster's head and prepared his most powerful spell. Blue flames began to flow along his sword as it reached extraordinary temperatures. Explosion. His sword was enveloped in a concentrated fire mantle. With a shout, Rigor brought the blade down directly onto the monster's right eye, focusing all his strength and mana into the attack. The sword pierced through, and the resulting explosion illuminated the forest, as the scaled tyrant let out one last roar before falling. As Rigor looked at the shattered blade of his sword and analyzed the creature's body, he felt the weight of the battle in his muscles and the disturbed mana flow. He couldn't remember the last time he felt tired or low on mana in battle. Even this fierce battle hadn't taken much from him, even using several spells in succession. His body, extremely strong and resistant to constant training, reached levels of resistance he couldn't measure, and his mana reserves were already much greater than his master's. He speculated that he was at the Emperor level. This monster was really formidable. I need to improve my magical efficiency. Every technique has its value, but fighting something this resistant requires more refined strategies. As Rigger returned to the tribe, he reflected on many things. Everywhere he went, whether among warriors or villagers, they greeted him. It was impressive how his presence had already become a figure of respect in the tribe. It wasn't just his strength, but also the way he treated others. He inspired confidence, as if trusting him was the right decision. How far will my natural strength grow? That question echoed in his mind, especially after the fight with the scaled tyrant. No warrior in the tribe could match him in pure physical strength. Some of the strongest warriors were still superior in combat due to their vast experience and refined techniques over the years. Of course, only if he didn't use magic, but Rigger felt that was only temporary. He had been improving so quickly that the gap seemed to shrink day by day. Moreover, his mana reserves continued to grow. It was almost intoxicating. He could feel the vastness of his capacity gradually increasing. But this made him think about something recently mentioned. Taze said his mana reserves stopped growing recently, 2 months after he turned 10. Maybe that's true for all of us. He didn't know if it was the same for everyone, as he no longer had any references. If there was a natural limit to mana reserves, he had just over 3 years before reaching his peak. This only strengthened his resolve to use every day to get even stronger. He thought about the children of the Iron Legion and the future of the tribe. Training them would be crucial, but he also needed to seek knowledge beyond the forest. When he entered his cabin, he found his parents eating. "Son, are you hungry?" Celine asked, serving him before he even answered. "Yes, Mom. I am." He replied with a smile as he sat at the table. The sound of leaves rustling in the morning breeze filled the air as sunlight filtered through the tall branches of the great forest. The training field buzzed with energy and enthusiasm as Linnea and Persina engaged in an intense sparring match. Their wooden swords clashed rhythmically, creating echoes that blended with the chirping of birds. Rigger, seated under the shade of a large tree beside Verdia, observed the match thoughtfully, his keen eyes picking up areas where both girls could improve. The duel carried a playful tone, yet it was clear they were taking it seriously. Linnea's aggressive attacks were swift and forceful, while Persina maintained a defensive stance, waiting patiently for an opportunity to counter. "Linnea is faster than before," Rigger noted, his sharp gaze following the girl's movements. Verdia, sitting beside him with her chin resting on her hand, shifted her gaze between the training field and the clear blue sky above. "She has spirit," she replied with a small smile. "But she lacks patience. That's something Persina cleverly uses to her advantage." The two fell into a companionable silence, their focus drawn back to the sparring match. Rigger felt an unfamiliar yet soothing calmness in Verdia's presence. She seemed more at ease in this moment, her usual enigmatic demeanor softened by the relaxed atmosphere. "Master," Rigger began, breaking the silence. "What stops me from simply stealing higher-level healing magic from melees?" "Many have tried," Verdia said, her voice tinged with a touch of amusement. "But the melee's church is relentless. They don't just pursue the thief, they go after their friends and family. Even the strongest aren't safe, they'll hire assassins, as they did with me, although I have my own particular enemy." Rigger fell silent, mulling over her words. Finally, he spoke, "So replacing the entire upper echelon of their leadership would be necessary?" Verdia gave a faint smile. "That would be the case." He exhaled deeply, his gaze drifting skyward. It's so complicated. I'll leave that for the future." Verdia chuckled softly, her laughter almost musical. The world does have its share of complications, but it also holds wonders waiting to be discovered. There's so much to live for and countless memories to be made. She held up her staff, adorned with an enormous red magic stone. "This staff came from a red dragon my group and I killed when it attacked a village. Afterward, the village celebrated for 7 days and nights without pause. The atmosphere is something I'll never forget." She then touched a star-shaped pendant with 6 points hanging around her neck. "This was given to me when I helped a princess reclaim her throne. It's said to have been passed down through generations of her royal family. I stayed there for a time. That was 200 years ago, but I still vividly remember the gratitude of the servants and villagers for overthrowing the former ruler. Sometimes, changing a nation's leadership can lead to an entirely different future." Rigger looked at her with admiration. "You've truly lived a life full of adventure. But, if you love traveling, exploring, and adventuring so much, why did you return to the forest? From the way you describe your adventures, I'm surprised you're not out wandering the world right now. Verdia tilted her head, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. Her gaze lingered on Linnea and Persina, now exchanging blows with greater intensity. Even adventurers need a break sometimes, Rigor. A place to recharge, reflect, and decide their next steps. The forest is peaceful, and the elves welcomed me kindly. But the truth is... She paused, watching as Linnea landed a decisive strike, winning the duel. The girl raised her wooden sword triumphantly, her infectious joy evident as Persina folded her arms, already plotting her comeback. The great forest can't hold me for long, Verdia finished with a nostalgic smile. I've lived in many places, Rigor. Among humans, demons, elves, even the beast tribes. I don't belong to any single place. I've always been a free spirit. Rigor stayed quiet, absorbing her words. He had always known Verdia was unlike anyone else he'd ever met, but hearing this so directly made him admire her even more. And you've never thought of settling down? He asked hesitantly. Maybe getting married? Finding a place to call home? Her answer came as a laugh, light and unrestrained, as she leaned toward him with a playful look in her eyes. Are you trying to see if you have a chance with me, little Rigor? His face grew hot, and he averted his gaze, stammering, That's not what I meant. You're adorable when you're flustered, she teased, her laughter softening into a warmer tone. To answer your question, I've never had that kind of luck. I've had a few unrequited loves, yes, but I've also turned down many suitors. Like who? Rigor asked, still struggling to shake off his embarrassment. The sword god from 3 generations ago, for one, she said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. But I found him far too arrogant, and it was the same with the others. There was never a time when both sides were interested at the same moment. And over time, I realized I might be destined to be alone. Destined. Rigor's tone was filled with curiosity. Verdia sighed, her gaze growing distant. It seems that way. I've spent so much time wandering the world that I've lost any deep connections. Perhaps it was my choice. Perhaps it was fate. I'm not entirely sure. But the truth is, I lost interest a long time ago. Rigor wanted to say something, but before he could find the right words, Linnea's voice called out from the training field. Boss. Persina says my move was wrong, even though she lost. He stood, still reflecting on their conversation, and glanced at Verdia, who gestured encouragingly. Go on. They're raw talent waiting to be refined. Do your job, trainer. At the training field, Linnea and Persina were panting but still brimming with energy. Rigor grabbed a wooden sword and began guiding them, correcting Linnea's stance and showing Persina how to transition more quickly between defense and offense. You're putting too much strength into your arms, he told Linnea. Use more of your hips to generate power. Persina, your stance is solid, but you need to work on your timing. Wait for the right moment to counter. The two absorbed his instructions with focus, and Rigor couldn't help but admire their talent. Though young and immature in some ways, they pushed each other to grow and improve. As he trained them, his thoughts briefly wandered to the rest of the tribe and the changes his influence had brought. Reflecting on the promising younger generation, Rigor felt a surge of pride. They were the future he hoped to guide toward greatness. After the final round of training, Linnea and Persina huddled together, debating animatedly about who had performed better. Meanwhile, Rigor stepped away, only to be approached by one of the warriors. Rigor, the warrior said. The tribal leader, Gustav, wants to speak with you. With Verdia's words still lingering in his mind and the progress of his students fresh in his thoughts, Rigor made his way toward Gustav, ready to face whatever the future held. Upon arriving at Gustav's cabin, Rigor noticed the heavy atmosphere in the room. Gustav sat in his carved wooden chair, arms crossed over his broad chest. His intense gaze followed Rigor the moment he entered. Rigor, Gustav began, his deep voice resonating in the small space. Sit down. I want to talk. Without hesitation, Rigor took one of the rustic chairs in front of him. The young man noticed more than just seriousness in Gustav's expression. There was a hidden concern in his tone. I've been watching you, Gustav said, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Not just as a warrior, but as someone who is becoming increasingly important to our tribe. Your growth in strength is remarkable, as is your ability to teach and inspire the younger generation. Rigor tilted his head slightly, sensing there was more to the praise. "Thank you, Chief Gustav," he replied humbly. "But I know you won't stay in the Great Forest," Gustav continued, his tone shifting to something more solemn. "I want to talk to you about the future of our tribe." Rigger pondered what might have led to such seriousness. "For years, Guise has been the natural successor to the leadership role," Gustav explained, crossing his arms. "He is strong, courageous, and loyal. However, like his sister, he lacks the necessary qualities to lead the tribe as a whole." This statement took Rigger by surprise. He had always respected Guise, a model warrior, but it was true that the man had an impulsive nature. "Guise is impatient," Gustav elaborated, sensing Rigger's thoughts. "He acts too quickly, without considering the consequences of his decisions. A leader must see the bigger picture, understand not only immediate dangers but also the long-term impact of their choices. And Guise lacks that vision." Rigger reflected on this, wondering where the conversation was heading. "That's why," Gustav continued, his eyes locking onto the young man, "I've been considering other options." "And who do you have in mind?" Rigger asked, his brow furrowing. "The heiresses of the Dodoldia and Adoldia tribes, Linnea and Persina," Gustav said with a faint smile. "They have something he doesn't, the ability to learn and grow. They're young and inexperienced, but full of potential. With the right training and guidance, they could become exemplary leaders." Rigger thought about these words. Linnea and Persina were undoubtedly talented and had the potential to become exceptional leaders. "Do you think they're ready for this?" Rigger asked, trying to understand Gustav's perspective better. "Not now," Gustav admitted, shaking his head. "They're still young and have much to learn. But the natural talent is there. That's why I plan to send them to study at the Renoa Magic Academy when they're older. There they'll gain broader knowledge, refine their skills, and expand their horizons." Renoa. The name of the famous magic university echoed in Rigger's mind. He knew the place was renowned, not only for its magical teachings but also for the wealth of knowledge it offered. "And what about Guise?" Rigger asked carefully. Gustav sighed, a heavy expression crossing his face. "He won't be happy, but I know he loves his daughter and wants the best for her. I have no doubt that, deep down, he'll understand that this is the best decision for the tribe. However, it will be my responsibility to deal with him when the time comes." The weight of leadership became clear to Rigger in that moment. Gustav wasn't just leading the tribe, he was carrying its hopes, fears, and internal struggles. "And you, Rigger?" Gustav asked, changing the subject. "Have you thought about what you'll do when you leave the tribe?" "I have a few goals," Rigger admitted. "That's good," Gustav advised with a faint smile. "The world out there is vast and dangerous. You'll need to be ready for what lies ahead." Rigger nodded, thanking him for the conversation before standing and leaving the cabin. Rigger arrived home at the end of the day, still reflecting on his conversation with Gustav. Inside the cabin, his mother, Celine, was leaning over a table, writing a letter. His father, Hontar, was gesturing animatedly while speaking with Verdia, who listened with a faint smile and a closed book in hand. "You're quiet today, Rigger," Hontar remarked, noticing his son's silence upon entering. "Conversations about the future tend to do that," Rigger replied as he approached. "How about a sparring match?" Hontar laughed, slapping the table enthusiastically. "Still trying to beat me without magic, boy?" He stood and leapt toward the yard beside the house. Rigger grinned, cracking his knuckles in anticipation as he followed. Celine and Verdia paused their activities and stepped onto the porch to watch. Positioned at opposite ends of the yard, the duel began. Rigger used the swift strikes of the sword god style, trying to land a blow on his father, who countered with kicks and claw-like attacks from every angle. "You're getting stronger, Rigger," Hontar said with a smile, spinning to deliver another blow. "But you're still hesitating at critical moments." "Maybe you're just getting old, Dad," Rigger teased, smoothly dodging the next attack. He took advantage of the opening to strike, but Hontar blocked with ease. Verdia, observing with interest, crossed her arms. "So, what was the conversation with Gustav about?" Rigger replied between attacks. "Gustav wants Linnea and Persina to become the tribe's leaders. He plans to send them to Renoa in the future." Hontar chuckled, spinning and landing a sidekick that made Rigger stagger back. "That's ambitious. But they have what it takes if trained well." Rigger straightened and attacked again, his movements now more calculated. I agree. They're talented and have strong personalities. I'll start teaching them some leadership skills. Good idea, Hantar said, blocking another attack. But leadership isn't something learned through words alone. It requires experience. Rigger stepped back, his eyes fixed on his father. Something changed in his stance. He seemed to be waiting for a moment, a single instance of weakness. When Hantar advanced again, Rigger sidestepped completely. Using his father's momentum against him, Rigger's sword stopped inches from Hantar's throat. The yard fell silent. Celine and Verdia watched in surprise as Hantar exhaled, standing up with a smile. Well, it seems the boy has finally done it, Hantar admitted, brushing the dust off his clothes. And when was the last time you lost control in a fight? Rigger grinned victoriously. I knew it would happen sooner or later. He continued, about control. It's been a while since I fought a life-or-death battle with a tough opponent. Maybe that's dulling my senses. I feel stuck at the advanced level. Could that be the reason? Perhaps. If this persists, ask Fendrel. He might know something about it, Hantar advised. His mother and Verdia congratulated him warmly. As night fell, Rigger thought about the challenges that still awaited him in the Great Forest.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.